Chapter 368. Hearing Huxian's words, Zhang Yan first pondered for a while, then looked at him and shook his head, saying, "Senior Hua, forgive me for not being able to comply." Huxian raised his eyebrows slightly and looked at Zhang Yan. After a moment of silence, he slowly said, "Junior brother, do you have any difficulties?" Zhang Yan smiled and said frankly, "Just now, I have returned from the devil's lair and have not yet returned to my cave abode, so I came here. If it was any other matter, it would only delay my cultivation for a few days. However, I am now in charge of the lower house, and in half a month's time, I will need to select a true disciple and send him to the upper house. At this juncture, how can I leave?" Huxian could not help but be taken aback. He had thought that Zhang Yan might refuse, but he was confident that he would be able to convince him. However, he had never thought that Zhang Yan would give such a reason. How could he care about the trifling matters of the lower house? However, this matter was not big, but it was not small either. True disciples were the foundation of Qinsang school. According to the rules of the school, there was no reason to delay. Zhang Yan was in charge of the lower house. Without his seal, the meridian opening disciples could not go to the upper house. This reason was enough even if it was brought up to the schoolmaster. Huxian could not help but frown. Although he was the top of the top 10 disciples, if he immediately used the schoolmaster's seal, he could force Huxian to lower his head. However, he was ranked first among the top 10 disciples. If he were to order a disciple who was only ranked 9th, he would have to rely on the sect leader to suppress him. Once this news got out, people would look down on him and he would lose all his prestige. Zhang Yan stood there calmly without saying a word. This matter was actually easy to solve. They were all top 10 disciples, and he could not do things for free. The key was whether the price Huxian was willing to pay was enough. He believed that Huxian would be able to understand his meaning. At this moment, a trace of a smile appeared on the corners of Zhong Muqing's mouth. He first glanced at Zhang Yan, and then he cupped his hands towards Huxian and said, "Senior brother Hua, in this little brother's opinion, junior brother Zhang has already broken out of his shell and is probably about to condense his mana and true seal. However, senior brother is chasing him around like this, causing him to be unable to cultivate in peace. This is not very appropriate." Huxian glanced at him and nodded in agreement. "That's right, it's indeed unfair to junior brother Zhang. I wonder if junior brother has any brilliant ideas." Zhong Muqing chuckled and said, "How about this? In the past, there was an elder in the Duzhen Hall who bestowed a true seal seed to me. But later on, I became a disciple of spiritual master Qin and he bestowed the seed to me. This thing is useless to me now. I'm willing to compensate you. What do you think?" When he said this, Huxian couldn't help but be moved. After a core formation cultivator reached the second level, he would need to condense a true seal. However, how to condense a true seal was quite particular. No matter how good one's aptitude was, no matter how high the quality of one's core was, as long as one was careless, the condensed true seal would have some flaws. This would cause one's future cultivation to be unstable and might even be unable to successfully form a nascent soul. It wasn't easy for a cultivator to cultivate to this stage. Because the masters of the various families were afraid that their disciples would take the wrong path, they used their own essence qi as a guide to condense all kinds of profound principles and secret techniques on how to cross this threshold into a talisman for the younger generation to condense. This was the true seal seed. When a disciple condenses a true seal, if he gets this kind of seed, it was equivalent to pointing out a wide and bright path in front of him. There was no need for him to carefully explore and waste time. He only needed to follow the true seal seed and cultivate step by step. Within the true seal seed, because each family secretly passed down secret mental cultivation methods, it was usually not passed down to only direct disciples. Therefore, Huxian and Zhang Yan were both surprised that Zhong Muqing was willing to generously take out this thing. Huxian pondered for a moment and said, "This is too unfair to junior brother. Even if you don't use this, your disciple can use it." However, Zhong Muqing chuckled and shook his head. It's fine. I'm a disciple of the enlightened master and naturally have an inheritance. I'm afraid I won't need this thing anymore. It's useless to keep it. I might as well do you a favor today and give it to junior brother Zhang. Hu Xian looked at Zhang Yan and tried his best to speak in a calm tone. He asked, Junior brother Zhang, what do you think? Zhang Yan's eyes narrowed slightly. Then, he cupped his hands and said, since senior brother Zhong is so generous, I can't refuse anymore. How about this, give me a few more days to settle the matters of the lower house before I leave. What do you think, senior brother Hua? Seeing that he finally agreed, Hu Xian was in a good mood. He said, it's fine. Junior brother is in charge of the lower house. This matter must be handled properly. I originally wanted to invite junior brother to my residence. Since it's like this, I won't keep you. Zhang Yan roared with laughter, and then he immediately bid farewell to the two of them before he stood up and flashed out, transforming into a ray of icy cold light that shot off into the distance. After he left, Zhong Muqing also bid farewell to Hu Xian and went to the Langyue Grotto. His identity was special, so he entered the inner house without being announced and went to see Immortal Qin. Along the way, he saw green smoke from the furnace in the cave, shrouding a pool of clear water. The fragrance of pink lotuses seeped into the spring. Amidst the smoke, he looked up and suddenly saw Immortal Qin sitting cross-legged on a jade lotus. However, his figure was blurry, so he bowed and said, Disciple greets Immortal Qin. Immortal Qin said lightly, You've seen that Zhang Yan? Zhong Muqing replied respectfully, Yes. Immortal Qin said, What do you think of this person? Zhong Muqing thought about it and decided to tell the truth. He said, It's only been 8 years since the competition. This Zhang Yan was originally a first-grade Dan, but now he has broken through the shell. It's really impressive. It surprised me. If he continues to cultivate like that, his cultivation will definitely get higher and higher, and it will be harder to treat him. Immortal Qin nodded and agreed, Muqing, you're right. Zhong Muqing raised his head and looked at Immortal Qin. He asked, It's just that there's something I don't understand. I wonder if Immortal Qin can explain it to me. Immortal Qin said, Speak. Zhong Muqing gritted his teeth and bowed, I wonder why Immortal Qin wants to give this true seal seed to Zhang Yan. The reason why he went to Hu Xian today was because he was ordered by Immortal Qin to find an opportunity to give this true seal to Zhang Yan. This matter was actually not easy to handle. Other than not letting the two of them see any flaws, he also had to grasp the timing. It took him a lot of brainpower. However, he had already secretly seen that the person who condensed the true seal was so powerful that it was almost unimaginable. Even with his eyesight, he could faintly feel that this person's cultivation was even stronger than Immortal Qin's. If he had not passed this stage long ago, he might not have been able to resist coveting it. However, he did not know why he gave it to Zhang Yan for no reason. Immortal Qin glanced at him and said with a smile that was not a smile, Have you seen this seal? Zhong Muqing's body trembled. He hurriedly lowered his head and said, I was rash. However, Immortal Qin did not care and said, It doesn't matter if you have seen it. You are my capable disciple, I should tell you about this matter. This true seal seed is indeed rare. If the sect did not have the change 100 years ago, whoever obtained this kind of thing would be his good fortune. However, it is not possible now. When she said this, she snorted softly, as if there was some resentment, and said, This thing was left by my senior brother in the past. If Zhang Yan condensed the true seal according to the method, let's not talk about the reaction of the sect leader's senior brother, but if he walks outside, my senior brother will definitely sense it. Do you understand? Zhong Muqing was shocked. He thought of the shocking Dharma during the Battle of the Three Pools and immediately understood. He thought of the reason and sincerely admired, Immortal Qin is indeed brilliant. Immortal Qin raised his hand and waved, saying, If you have nothing else, then you can leave. Zhong Muqing bowed and slowly left the cave residence. Immortal Qin stood up and stood there, looking at the pool of cold water under his feet. Since Immortal Peng stepped into the chess game, she could already feel that the matters in the sect were gradually getting out of her control. Especially recently, she increasingly felt that her hands and feet were tied. The previous feeling of being able to handle things with ease and detachment had long since disappeared. However, since they were both Taoist Dong Tian, she couldn't do anything to him. However, it was much easier to deal with Zhang Yan. Taking advantage of the fact that his cultivation was still shallow and he hadn't stabilized his footing, she could still restore some of the situation. After Zhang Yan left the Ten Peaks mountain, he went all the way back to Zhao Yu Cave residence. He used the lower house as an excuse in front of Huxian, but it was not without a purpose. In fact, it was just to delay time. He was not a reckless person. Not to mention that he had been warned by Immortal Peng to be careful, even if he was really ordered to go out, he could not rashly agree to it. He had to understand the details before he could take action. Therefore, after he entered the main hall, he sent a talisman to Zhou Chengju to see if he could get some information. Then he entered the small pot mirror and sat on the bamboo building. He shook his sleeves and a loud sound was heard. A flying pavilion that was 10 feet high appeared. This building had 6 floors. On the eaves and pillars, there were all kinds of visible and ferocious beasts. It looked cold and quiet, full of evil spirit. He flicked his sleeves and jumped inside. He first came to the stone tablet that controlled the mechanism of the restriction. After standing for a moment, he reached out and put his hand on it, operating the divine contract cultivation method. Not long after, there was a slight vibration on his arm. He felt a rumbling sound coming from the entire devil treasury. He immediately realized that the 5th layer of restriction had been opened. He could not help but feel happy. In the past, he could only reach above the 4th layer, but now that he had cultivated to the peak of the divine contract cultivation method, he wanted to give it a try. Sure enough, he opened the restriction in one fell swoop. He tapped his feet, floated up along the staircase, and landed on the 5th layer. He swept his gaze around and saw that the interior of the pavilion was built with white jade. However, there was a strange astrological diagram drawn on the ground. Even with his knowledge, he was unable to identify its origins. After a few glances, he looked around and finally found the 4th to 6th layer of the divine contract cultivation method on a white jade wall in the corner. He carefully read the set of cultivation method and found that it was more complicated than the previous 3 layers of the divine contract cultivation method. However, it still required him to kill people and use the devil slip to absorb their flesh and primordial spirit, especially the disciples of the devil sect. As he was reading, the mirror spirit came out and held up his hands, saying, "Master, there is a flying letter from outside the mansion. Please have a look." Zhang Yan took it and looked at it casually. He thought it was a letter from Zhou Chengju, but when he looked at the inscription, it was Qin Ma Bai. Chapter 369. Sipt SC equals. Placiate equals 3274. Zhang Yan saw that it was the sect leader who had personally sent a letter. For a moment, countless thoughts ran through his mind, trying to guess what it was for. CM, after opening the letter, he took out the paper and read it carefully. After reading it, he couldn't help but take a deep breath. Even though he prided himself on being daring, he was still shocked by the contents of the letter. The sect leader wanted him to take advantage of Huxian's order. This trip was just right for him to do something big. It was just that this matter was too dangerous. If he wasn't careful, he would die. Therefore, the sect leader promised in the letter that if Zhang Yan did this matter well, the sect leader would secretly teach him one of the 12 techniques. Zhang Yan put down the letter and paced back and forth in the hall. Although the top 10 disciples were glorious, if it was a few hundred years ago, they could cultivate in peace. They didn't need to go out to cultivate to the Yuanying realm. But now that the demonic tribulation was about to start, no one dared to say that they could safely pass through it. Even if he cultivated in the sect, he didn't feel very safe. Moreover, the 16 sects were about to fight. As for the specific day, due to the influence of the demonic tribulation, the sect leader of the top 10 profound sects hadn't decided yet. But at the latest, it would be within the next few hundred years. After that, they would probably have to fight with the demon sect. The only thing he could do now was to work hard to raise his cultivation level before then. Only then would he have a chance to survive this tribulation. But if he wanted to cultivate to the Yuanying realm within 100 years, he didn't have full confidence. But before him, the art of comprehending the divine contract allowed him to see another path. This method was nothing more than killing the demon sect disciples. If he could raise his cultivation level to the Yuanying realm first, with his strong body, he wouldn't attract too much attention and he wouldn't have the ability to protect himself. He would be able to deal with the tribulation. If he killed more demon sect disciples, would he be able to refine the spirit contract to the 4th level, which was equivalent to the Yuanying realm? Zhang Yan abruptly stopped in his tracks. It seemed that he had to go to Mount Qingtong. According to the letter. Although this trip was extremely dangerous, if what the letter said was true, he glanced at the broken soul contract art. It could help him solve a big problem. Moreover, on the other hand, wasn't this his chance? Didn't the sect leader entrust this matter to him mean that he trusted him? He took out the letter, and at the end, there were 3 talisman cards. His eyes flashed. This risk was worth taking. This trip was no small matter. Since he had already made up his mind, he naturally had to make some preparations. He counted the days and thought about it carefully. Currently, he didn't lack any medicinal pills. After annihilating the Su clan, Zhou Chengju had obtained more than 10,000 pieces. Coupled with the fact that Zhou Chengju would occasionally order people to send some over, other than for his disciples to use for cultivation, it was more than enough to deal with this trip. There was no need to search anymore. It's just that the letter mentioned that in Gushangzhe, there was a yin wind howling and wreaking havoc, so much so that it was not inferior to the little cold world. He must bring along the spring coming bottle, which contained a river of Huanyang wine. It was enough for him. Then he thought for a moment and said, "Where is the mirror spirit?" The mirror spirit heard the voice and came out. She bowed deeply and said, "Master, I am here." Zhang Yan threw out a sleeve, pointed at it, and said, "Take a look at this thing. Can you open it?" This sleeve was left behind by Xiaomu. The reason why Zhang Yan didn't open it all these years was because he was afraid that if he moved it rashly, he might set up some restriction talisman and accidentally be discovered by the Shao clan. That would be bad. Secondly, he was afraid that his cultivation was still shallow. Even if he opened the sleeve, he would damage the things inside. Then the loss would outweigh the gain. Moreover, he had many magic weapons on him, so he didn't have the mood to touch them. That was why he had never opened it. Now that he was going to Mount Qingtong, he couldn't ignore anything that could save his life. So he decided to open it and see if there were any treasures that could help him. The mirror spirit took a look and smiled faintly. She said, "Master, in this sleeve, someone cast a few insignificant restrictive spells. If you don't want to damage the things inside, give me 5 or 6 days, and I will be able to open it." Zhang Yan couldn't help but feel happy. He said, "Only 5 or 6 days. Okay, you can take it and refine it first. I will look for you in 7 days." The mirror spirit bowed and left to accept the order. Zhang Yan sat on the jade couch and calculated in his heart. Since the day of the grand competition, he had been refining the Dan Sha in the cave residence. He didn't have the time to refine the serene yin heavy water. Since he had to go to that dangerous place in a few days, he might as well take this opportunity to do it today. Thinking of this, he stepped out of the master mansion and entered the clear nether heavenly lake. He took out the triprimordial chaos water banner and shook it in his hand. In an instant, the waves roiled and white foam flew everywhere. They parted to the sides and revealed a path ahead. He gathered his fiendish core and walked down the mist, heading towards the depths of the heavenly lake. After walking for thousands of feet, he glanced around and saw that this place was grotesque and dazzling. There were all kinds of fish, shrimp, and turtle spirits swimming around. He didn't want to look any longer. Another thousands of feet down, there were more strange fish and strange insects. Some were dozens of feet big, their eyes were like lanterns and their scales were like blades. Although they looked fierce, they were timid like mice. Some were as small as a baby's fingers. They came in groups and ran amok. Wherever they passed, the big fish and small insects all retreated. Zhang Yan thought, although I live in this clear serenity heavenly lake, I still don't know how deep this place is. The serene heavy water needs a lot of nether chi. Although this place is enough, the deeper I go, the more it will precipitate. Why don't I go down and take a look? He waved the banner again and went another thousands of feet down. At this time, the surrounding currents were bursting and even he felt the chill penetrating into his bones. He took out the spring-coming bottle and drank a few mouthfuls of Huanyang wine. This thing was wonderful. Just like in his stomach, his limbs were smooth and his body was warm again. He smiled and went down another thousands of feet, but he still couldn't see the end of the heavenly lake. He couldn't help but be amazed. However, there was already enough nether chi in this place. It was useless to go any further, and it might even affect his cultivation. Therefore, he pointed his finger and stopped the banner. Then, he released the pale evil chi, which turned into a pure white cloud and sat in the air. He made a hand sign and in a split second, the 365 drops of serene heavy water leaped out from the top of his head. He used the hand sign and without needing to use much strength, the heavy water swelled and shrunk. It rotated slowly as if it was breathing and sucked in the surrounding nether chi. This cultivation took 6 days and 6 nights. Zhang Yan had just now refined the 365 drops of serene heavy water again. With a slight movement, all of them responded like the tide and moved according to his heart. They seemed to be even more agile than before. He let out a long laugh. With a shake of his shoulder, he collected the heavy water and waved his sleeves. He flicked his sleeves again and took back the Tri-Elements mixed water banner. He no longer used it, but released the star's sword ball. It turned into a sharp sword light and flew through the water. In just a moment, he broke through the cold current and stepped back into the main mansion. He had just sat on the jade couch when the mirror spirit came. She held the sleeve bag and said respectfully, "Master, the restriction on this thing has been refined by me. Thanks to Master, there is no defect inside or outside." Zhang Yan's eyes lit up. He took the sleeve bag and transferred a spiritual chi into it. He opened the seal and looked inside with his mind. After a little identification, he found that although this sleeve bag wasn't a treasure bag, it was divided into 5 layers. The items inside were arranged according to categories, which saved him some trouble. He looked at the first layer first and saw that there were a lot of things inside. Just the bottles and jars of medicinal pills almost filled a corner. There were also many other things such as spiritual herbs, strange stones, and so on. He could name most of them, so it wasn't rare. In the second layer, there were 12 jade boxes placed neatly. He raised his eyebrows, took them out and opened them. He found that they were 12 superior spiritual swords. He picked one up in his hand and held it in front of his eyes. He saw the cold light and the coldness pierced his skin. He gently flicked it with his finger and it made a clear sound. He couldn't help but nod. He carefully looked at the seal on the body of the sword, and he noticed that it was refined by the Sex Treasure Yang courtyard, and it wasn't made by the Shao clan. With a thought, he put it away in his sleeve, and he intended to bestow it to his disciples in the future. In this level, besides the 12 jade boxes, there were some other magical treasures. If they were placed in the outside world, they would be objects that would cause others to feel envious. However, they truly couldn't enter Zhang Yan's eyes, and he didn't even look at them carefully before tossing them to the side. In the third layer, there were 3 cultivation technique books. After flipping through them, Zhang Yan shook his head. Although the cultivation technique wasn't bad, there were many of them in the Jinluo courtyard. It was useless to him. Instead, he found a few letters between Xiaomu and Nanhua sect, Taihao school, and a few other Yuanying spiritual masters. He took them out and opened them. He found that they were nothing more than old stories and greetings. Most of them were about how he fought with Tao Jinren. After looking at them, he didn't find anything special, so he put them to the side. In the next layer, there were all kinds of rare treasures, such as jade rabbits, jade horses, corals, agate, and emerald pearls. These things were used by Xiaomu as a gift to the younger generation in the clan. They were useless to Zhang Yan. Just as he was about to go over, he suddenly saw a jade tablet. He flipped his wrist and took it over. There was a vivid picture of a red-crowned crane on it that seemed like it was about to leap out. He thought about it and thought, if I'm not wrong, this beast prohibition talisman should be a gift from Nanhua sect's Yuanying spiritual master to Xiaomu. After thinking about it, this talisman would have some use in the future, so he put it away. At this moment, Zhang Yan didn't find anything good in the sleeve bag. He couldn't help but feel a little disappointed. He didn't have any hope and looked at the last fifth layer. He only saw a lone silver-white wine pot with the two words, Mu Shi, on it. Holding it in his hand, he found that it was at best a spiritual weapon. However, no matter how he poured it, he didn't see anything coming out of it. However, Zhang Yan didn't look down on this item. To be able to make Xiaomu place it alone, it definitely wasn't that simple. He stretched out his hand and wanted to pull open the cover of the jug. However, with his current strength, he couldn't open it. He was startled. His eyes flashed and he was instantly interested. He flipped the wine jug in his hand and immediately found something at the bottom of the bottle. There was a simple talisman hidden there. He used his Dan Sha and wiped it away. At this moment, there was no resistance when he lifted the cover of the jug. He easily opened it. He stretched out his palm and poured the contents out of the jug. Immediately, a handful of dark red beads rolled out. Each bead was the size of a fish's eye and was boiling hot. He didn't know what it was before, but after thinking about it, he couldn't help but be moved. He exclaimed, "Could this be Scarlet Thunder Bead?" Chapter 370. Zhang Yan didn't expect Xiaomu to leave behind a pot of scarlet thunder beads. Just this item alone was enough to make up for all the previous ones. He was excited, he didn't expect to have such a harvest, it was not in vain that he kept this in his sleeve until now. This scarlet thunder bead was extremely powerful, it was created by the Yuanying cultivator's own Yuan gang mixed with the scarlet thunder bead. After 49 days and nights of non-stop breathing out yang qi, it was finally formed. Once it was used, it would explode like the sky was falling, rocks would crack, everything within 100 feet would be turned into powder. Zhang Yan carefully stretched out his hand and grabbed a handful of them. If he were to throw a handful of them at an enemy, even a nascent soul cultivator would have to retreat and avoid them for the time being. He poured out all the scarlet thunder beads and counted them carefully. In the end, he found that there were as many as 378 beads. He was overjoyed and thought, there's actually so many of them, it seems that Xiaomu used them to deal with Tao Jinren. He thought again, if Xiaomu was killed by him, he would have used this on him. Even if he didn't die from the explosion, he could only watch helplessly as he ran away. In reality, he was thinking too much. At that critical moment, if Xiaomu had the scarlet thunder bead in his hands, why wouldn't he use it to save his life? This scarlet thunder bead was not created by Xiaomu alone, it was created by a few Yuanying Jinren and him. Just now he had obtained this much. Originally, he was going to use it to deal with Tao Jinren. But because the last step of the scarlet thunder bead was to be nurtured in this mother tin pot for half a year before it could be formed, even if Xiaomu wanted to use it, he wouldn't be able to. But if Zhang Yan and him were to fight a few days later, then it would be very hard to say. Zhang Yan carefully poured the red thunder gravel back into the pot and stuck a talisman on it. Then, he put it in his sleeve pocket and carefully kept it. With the help of this item, he had some confidence in completing the task assigned by the sect leader. He pondered for a while and made sure that he had not missed anything. He thought to himself, once I'm done with the matters of the lower house, I'll be able to rush to Mount Qingtong. He stood up, wrapped in a wisp of smoke, and flew around. In the blink of an eye, he exited the Zhao Yu cave abode through the formation door and flew towards the Azure Parasol Mountain. Arriving at the cloud-swaying peak of the lower courtyard, he stood on a large rock at the peak and sent a command talisman down. A moment later, the 3 deacons from the lower house hurried over. Zhang Yan asked in a slow voice, "There are still a few more days before the gathering day. How many people have come today?" Ever since Zhang Yan came to the lower house, the disciples from the aristocratic families had lost their arrogance and became cautious every day. They were afraid that if they were not careful, the 3 deacons would find out where it hurt, and Zhang Yan would use it as an excuse to expel them from the lower house. Because of this, the 3 deacons felt that their prestige was increasing day by day. They also knew where their confidence came from, and they engraved Zhang Yan's instructions in their hearts even more, not daring to forget them. At this moment, when Zhang Yan asked the question, Ma Shouxiang took the initiative to stand out and held up the register. Without even flipping through it, he immediately replied, reporting to deacons, the original date was 3 months. But 2 months ago, all the disciples had gathered, and there were no exceptions. The reason why the 4 disciples were arranged to enter the lower house was to obtain the position of a true disciple. Of course, they would not fall behind others. They had opened their meridians early and returned to their temples to wait. On the other hand, the disciples from the aristocratic families had been taught a lesson by Zhang Yan to the point that they were afraid. It was fine if they could not become a true disciple, but if they missed the deadline and were beheaded, they would have no one to reason with. Therefore, after Zhang Yan passed down the decree, they hurriedly went to open their meridians. Not daring to tarry for even a moment, they all returned to the mountain to wait patiently. Zhang Yan received the register and opened it. The words that entered his eyes were strong and powerful. On it were the disciples' names, ages, origins, years of cultivation, and the grade of each pulse. It was all clear at a glance, and he unconsciously nodded his head. His gaze swept over them, and he had already chosen a few people. Ma Shouxiang was already prepared and offered a brush and ink. Zhang Yan nodded to him, and with a tick of the brush, he selected the true disciples today. Among them, there were 4 people from the teacher and disciple faction, 4 from the aristocratic families, and 3 disciples who did not come from the large families. Finally, including the 2 Wang sisters, a total of 13 people were chosen, which was exactly half of the lower house disciples. After putting down the brush, he took out a jade seal and stamped it on the register. He then passed it to Ma Shouxiang, saying, "Because I have something important to do, I need to leave the mountain for a while. Right now, I have no time to care about what kind of spiritual houses these disciples will use. You don't have to rush to send them to the upper house. You can order them to return to their sects, and I will make arrangements when I return." Ma Shouxiang nodded in agreement, and the other 2 attendants behind him also agreed in unison. Zhang Yan gazed at the vast mountains, and with a shout, he turned into smoke and disappeared into the clouds in front of the 3 attendants' eyes. Soon after, they saw a sword rainbow tear through the atmosphere, speeding towards the northwest. After a flash of light, it completely disappeared, and only the sound of the sword whistling could be heard for a long time. 1,000 miles away from Qingtong, on top of a mound, there was a 10 feet long jade couch. An old man sat arrogantly on it. His eyes were sunken, his hair was long, and he wore a red robe that was like a blood cloud. With a single glance, it was obvious that he was a devil Dao cultivator. That was not all, but there was a woman in front of his couch. One of her clothes had been torn off, and she was dripping with blood. It was a tragic sight, but her expression was blurry, and her face was full of confusion. It was obvious that she did not feel any pain. Because the news of an immortal's house appearing on Mount Qingtong had spread far and wide, everyone in the East Flower sect knew about it. Every day, there would be cultivators passing by, and when they saw this scene, they would all be surprised. However, because this was too strange, although many people hesitated and wanted to come down to investigate, they were afraid of this old man's cultivation, and no one dared to come over for a few days. After 3 days, 2 disciples of the Southern Flower sect passed by this place and stopped. They were a man and a woman, and they were a pair of brother and sister. Both of them were in the core formation realm. When they saw the arrogant and evil appearance in front of them, they felt indignant and could not hold back, but they were also afraid that the other party was up to something. After discussing with each other for a while, they each went in a different direction and wandered within a few hundred miles. Just now, when they met again, they saw that there was no help by their side, so they released the immortal birds they rode. They were 2 divine cranes with white feathers and red crowns. As soon as they were released, they spread their wings and let out a long and clear cry that stopped the clouds. At this time, they no longer hesitated. With a shout, they split into 2 sides, one from the left and the other from the right, and swooped down. The old man's expression was slightly solemn. He clenched his fist and shook his body. A yellow smoke flew out from the top of his head, and there seemed to be a malicious spirit in it. Miserable winds howled, and Yin Qi swirled violently as it rushed up. However, he was only in the core formation realm, so it was a bit difficult for him to fight 1 against 2. The 2 disciples each took out their magic swords and swung them down. A clear light flashed, and a crack was instantly cut open in the yellow smoke. At this moment, the old man heard the cry of a crane. Just as he was about to dodge, he felt pain in his shoulder. He could not help but grunt and immediately fell on the bed. The male disciple looked rather heroic. He stood in the clouds with his sword and sneered. So it's a cultivator from the 9-piece cult. You're unlucky to run into us brother and sister today. Just now, they were still cautious. One of them held the line while the other attacked. They did not dare to attack recklessly. Now that they saw that the old man was injured, they could not help but relax a little. However, at this moment, a faint smoke that was hard to see with the naked eye floated over from behind. Then, it swayed gently, and a Taoist appeared behind the male disciple. This person was thin and ugly. His cheeks were sunken in, and although the bridge of his nose was straight, his nostrils were very big. A large part of his forehead was bald, and his sparse white hair fell on his shoulders. His eyes flashed with a faint green light, and his Taoist robe fluttered in the wind. He looked like a skeleton. The woman could see it clearly from afar and could not help but exclaim. The Taoist grinned and gave a strange smile. With a light blow, a wisp of black smoke flew out. This male disciple had quite a high status in the Southern Flower sect and was usually very quick-witted. When he heard that cry of surprise, he knew that something was wrong. He did not turn around to look and instead rushed forward. However, before he could take 2 steps, he felt a wave of dizziness. His limbs became weak, and he instantly fell from the sky. The Taoist flicked his finger, and a wisp of green yin fire flew out. With a sizzling sound, it touched the disciple's body. This person did not make a sound, and under the shocked gaze of the female disciple, he was burned into a pile of ashes. Even his origin spirit was extinguished. The woman wanted to escape, but she felt her body go limp. Then, she felt a pain on her neck, and she discovered that it was pinched by a withered hand. The red-crowned crane that the female disciple brought with her circled around for a while before fiercely pecking at the Taoist's back. However, before it could get close, it seemed to have touched a layer of faint smoke, and for no reason, it turned into a pool of thick blood and disappeared. The red-crowned crane that the other male disciple left behind wailed, and then flew away without a trace. The strange Taoist shook his head and did not give chase. He muttered, "Are all the disciples of the South Flower sect so useless now?" Back then, Taoist Feiju dared to challenge Shaoqing sect with his sword. Even though his appearance was ugly, his voice was deep and pleasing to the ear, and it made people want to listen to his words. He stared at the woman for a long time, and the eerie green fire in his eyes flickered. The female disciple was terrified, and her whole body trembled. However, with her neck pinched and her body powerless, she could not make a sound at all. After a while, the Taoist smacked his lips and let out a long sigh. He said, "Soft skin and tender flesh, it looks like it tastes good. Unfortunately, I have not eaten humans since I formed my nascent soul." He casually threw the woman in front of the old man's bed, and said, "Su Gongyuan, I'll leave her for you." Su Gongyuan did not look at the woman, and his face was gloomy. He said, "Jinren, it has been 3 days, and you still haven't found a suitable physical body to attach your soul to?" The Taoist laughed, "Su Gongyuan, don't be impatient. Since I have promised to avenge your son, I will not go back on my words. If that Zhang Yan comes here, I will get rid of him for you. However, if you want me to kill my way to Qinsang School, I will not be able to do so unless I am tired of living." Su Gongyuan snorted. He understood that the object hidden under Mount Qingtong was the reason why the Taoist came here. If he was not proficient in formations and prohibition, he would not have been brought along by this person. Now that the disciples of Xian Gate were coming to Mount Qingtong, and there were many with high cultivation base among them, he could not move an inch without this person, and could only listen to him. At this moment, the Taoist's expression changed. He licked his lips and said, "A few more people are coming, I hope my luck is better this time." Chapter 371. Mount Qingtong was located in the northwestern region of the East Flower Continent. It was a vast plain, and the mountain peak rose from the ground. It was tall and lofty, like a sharp blade. Its color was lush, and its appearance was very strange. It looked like a pillar that had lost half of its length. When Zhang Yan arrived at this place, it was already nighttime. He looked over from 100 miles away, and sure enough, he saw the light of treasures soaring into the sky. It was as if the clouds had dyed the sky red, and it illuminated the entire sky. It was even more magnificent than the stars in the sky. He raised his head and looked over. From time to time, there would be a few streaks of light flashing across the sky like shooting stars. They were cultivators who also wanted to go to Mount Qingtong. The commotion in Mount Qingtong was really too big. In the eyes of many cultivators, if it wasn't the appearance of the celestial abode, then it was the appearance of the Devil Palace. Thus, those who received the news all rushed over, afraid that if they were a step too late, the benefits would be taken away by others. When Zhang Yan came over just now, he saw many disciples of the Celestial Gate. However, his sword escape was very fast, and he flashed by, so no one could tell who he was. He thought to himself that with his current identity, if he directly rushed over, he would definitely attract the attention of others, and they might even be on guard and be afraid of him. This time, he came under the secret order of the sect master, so he couldn't be too ostentatious. His mind changed, and he thought to himself, "Looks like I have to conceal myself again." He reached into his sleeve and took out the 1,000 Phantoms jade mirror. He flipped through the pages, and after a dozen or so pages, his eyes fell on the portrait of a young cultivator. This person's appearance was ordinary, and there was nothing special about him. He could use it. He smiled slightly, and his eyes looked at the portrait of this person, and he shook the mirror. That person walked down and merged with Chu Li's body. A stream of clear air passed by, and Chu Li's appearance changed. Zhang Yan opened his sleeve and looked at it. The treasured clothes he was wearing were also very eye-catching, so he took out a crane cloak and put it on to cover his body. After a careful look, he saw that there were no more flaws, and he nodded in satisfaction. With a leap, he flew into the air. However, he had only flown a few dozen miles when he saw a mound in the wilderness. There was a jade couch on top of the mound, and an old man wearing a red robe was standing there. He seemed to be sizing up the cultivators passing by, and when he saw Zhang Yan flying over. Then, he cast a cold gaze over. "Isn't that Su Gongyuan?" When Zhang Yan saw this, his eyebrows unconsciously rose as he recognized the other party's origins. However, he had already changed his appearance, so he didn't want to cause trouble for this person. With a burst of his escaping smoke, he quickly flew away. Just now, as the two of them looked at each other, Su Gongyuan inexplicably felt that this person seemed somewhat familiar, as if he had seen him somewhere before. However, when he took a closer look, he couldn't find any trace of familiarity. For someone like him, as long as he had seen someone before, he would remember it in his heart. He couldn't help but frown. After Zhang Yan left, a wisp of faintly discernible, slightly muddy yellow smoke floated over. A wisp of faintly discernible and slightly muddy smoke floated over. The old Taoist's voice rang in his ears. Why? Do you know this person? If he is your enemy, just say the word and I will go and capture him. Su Gongyuan hesitated for a moment, then shook his head. He said in a low voice, forget it, perhaps this junior recognized the wrong person. Although he was suspicious of Zhang Yan's identity, if he really called this old demon to capture someone, the next time he met the person, this old demon might not be willing to do anything. However, when he said this, he definitely didn't think that the enemy he had been searching for had already brushed past him. At this moment, in front of Qing Tong Mountain, from time to time, a formation that looked like a decorated archway would appear and disappear. There were hundreds of cultivators flying around it like stars, but most of them weren't paying attention to whether or not they should enter. Just now, some people dared to enter the formation, but in the blink of an eye, they found themselves at the back of the mountain. This could be considered lucky, as up until now, only to see people enter and not leave the formation. As a result, although there were many cultivators here, there weren't many who were proficient in formations, so they couldn't help but be cautious and hesitant, not daring to recklessly enter. In a remote corner on the west side, 5 or 6 cultivators were gathered together. They were all disciples of the 5 Smoke Mountains Path Source Immortal Mansion. One of them looked at the formation and shook his head. I wonder what formation this is, the number of cycles doesn't make sense at all. A middle-aged cultivator who seemed to be the leader turned around and looked behind him. There was a white-bearded old man sitting there with a focused expression, holding a pile of bamboo chips and repeatedly calculating. The middle-aged cultivator said, there's no rush, let's wait for Elder Hu to calculate it. However, every time the old man calculated, he would shake his head and frown would deepen. After an hour, he finally threw away the bamboo chips and said apologetically, everyone, I'm quite accomplished in the path of formations, but if I want to understand this formation clearly, it's definitely not something that can be done in a mere few days. The middle-aged Taoist also knew that this formation wasn't easy to break, so he asked patiently, may I ask Hu Lai, how long will it take? The old man stretched out 2 fingers and said, 20 years. 20 years? The surrounding disciples exclaimed in surprise, and one of them said with slight mockery, if it takes 20 years, why would we come looking for you? The old man couldn't sit still when he was mocked in front of his face. However, besides being proficient in formations, he had nothing else in his life, and his cultivation couldn't compare to these people. He wanted to argue, but when the words reached his mouth, they turned into a grunt in the end. He simply cupped his hands and left in a huff. The middle-aged Taoist saw that he was useless, so he didn't try to persuade him to stay at all and let him go. As a result, the old man felt even more annoyed. He walked quickly and left the group of people, muttering a few words. When he was far away, he was about to take out a magic tool and fly away, but he heard someone shout behind him, fellow Taoist, please wait. He stopped and turned around. He saw an average-looking young cultivator of average stature, so he asked curiously, fellow Taoist, what's the matter? This person was Zhang Yan. He walked up and bowed, saying, fellow Taoist, just now, I saw you deducing the formation from the side. I believe you must have some understanding of it. I have a few questions in my mind, so I wanted to ask for your advice. The old man saw that his attitude was kind, and though he couldn't see through his cultivation level, he felt that his cultivation level was quite high. He didn't dare to be arrogant, so he quickly bowed back and said, I don't dare to be arrogant. What questions do you have, please ask. If I know anything, I will definitely tell you. Zhang Yan pointed behind him and said, fellow Taoist, if I want to enter this formation, are there any taboos? The old man chuckled and said, since fellow Taoist is sincerely asking, then I will be frank. Then let this old man be frank. Although this formation can mess up one's position and reverse the 5 elements, it is actually just a bewildering formation. It is not a killing formation. No matter who passes through it, they will not suffer any damage. However, if one's luck is too bad, they will die. However, if one's luck is too bad, if one is trapped here for dozens of years and still can't get out, I'm afraid they'll be trapped here until they die. Zhang Yan asked again, then if we invite many powerful cultivators here, can they break through this formation? The old man shook his head and said, fellow Taoist must be joking. This formation is connected to the earth veins and corresponds to the heavens. If I'm not wrong, this should be a protective formation. Unless you can destroy the entire Qing Tong mountain along with the earth veins within 1,000 miles, you won't be able to break through the formation with brute force. Otherwise, it's just wishful thinking. When Zhang Yan heard this, he already knew what was going on. Now that he knew what was going on, he cupped his hands and said, thank you for your guidance, fellow Taoist. After saying goodbye to the old man, he pondered for a while and rode his smoke to the sky. He looked down. After a while, he saw a decorated archway appear. His eyes flashed and he formed a hand sign. After a long smoke flew over, he entered the formation. At the same time, 2 cultivators from the Inata temple stepped into the formation from Qing Tong mountain. They gazed over. They couldn't help but reveal a surprised expression. This place was vast and boundless. In the distance, there was a tall mountain. On the mountain ridge, there were continuous palaces and pavilions. There was a long river that was like a jade belt, winding from the north and surrounding the mountain. If they didn't know that they had stepped into Qing Tong mountain, they would think that they had returned to the outside world. One of the cultivators with a fat body and a thin mustache couldn't help but exclaim, Senior Marshal Brother, this is clearly a small world created by a powerful cultivator. Standing beside him was a Taoist wearing a lotus crown and a yellow robe. His body was strong and his eyes were spirited. When he heard this, he nodded. His gaze swept over and suddenly saw a decorated archway at the foot of the mountain. He pointed with his horsetail whisk and said, let's go there and take a look. The 2 of them flew up and landed below the decorated archway. The Taoist walked up and raised his head to take a look. He saw that on the jade plaque, there were some words. However, it seemed to be very old and was a bit unclear. After looking at it carefully a few times, just now, he was able to recognize the 2 words, Yaoyin, and unconsciously read it out. The thin mustache cultivator frowned and thought hard, as if he was thinking about its origin. In the end, he said with uncertainty, Senior Marshal Brother, this Yaoyin. Could it be the Yaoyin clan? Then, his body trembled and he said in shock, could this place be the place where old ancestor Taiheng ascended? The Taoist in the lead had a solemn expression and said in a deep voice, Junior Marshal Brother, it's not impossible. 1,000 years ago, when I was still a Taoist child under my master, I heard of the Yaoyin clan's reputation. Rumor has it that it's a sect established by old ancestor Tai Heng's eldest disciple, Yi Zhouyang. This old ancestor Tai Heng was once a great figure in the demonic path, and his cultivation was exceedingly high. However, for some reason, all the techniques he passed down were profound Taoist techniques. It's truly puzzling. Later on, he ascended and no one heard of anyone obtaining his demonic sect's teachings. Some people suspected that it was hidden in this Yaoyin clan. However, I heard that this sect's whereabouts were mysterious and no one knew where it was. I never expected it to be here. The 2 of them looked at each other, and their eyes were filled with shock and worry. If the old ancestor Tai Heng's teachings were really hidden here, then it wouldn't be as simple as 1 or 2 Taoist books, but all the inheritances of the entire sect. The Yaoyin clan's inheritance was one thing, but if the demonic sect's secret techniques were here, if the demonic sect's disciple obtained it, it would undoubtedly greatly strengthen the demonic sect. The thin-bearded cultivator couldn't help but break out in a cold sweat when he thought of this and said, Senior Marshal Brother, we can't let that demonic sect disciple obtain this place. We need to quickly return and report to the sect master. The Taoist shook his head and said, this place is easy to enter but hard to leave. Even if you go back, you won't be able to find the way. The thin-bearded cultivator couldn't help but become anxious and said, Senior Marshal Brother, then what should we do? The Taoist stroked his beard and said, don't panic. Since we're here, let's explore it first and find the mechanism. He raised his horsetail whisk and pointed to the mountain path in front of him, saying, let's go there first. Not long after they left, a decorated archway appeared out of thin air. With a flash of light, Zhang Yan walked out from it. Chapter 372. As soon as Zhang Yan entered the formation, he saw that it was a vast place with blue sky and clear water. In the distance, the mountain range stretched on like a crouching beast lying on the ground, its back undulating. The highest peak was covered by the clouds, misty and indistinguishable. On the verdant mountain ridge, one could see tall pavilions and temples covered in golden glazed tiles. The exquisite pavilions followed the mountain and went straight up to the peak. He counted carefully and found that there were a total of 18 mountain ridges, and each of them converged on the highest peak. Because the sect leader mentioned a few things in the letter, he knew a little about the origin of this place. He knew that this should be a small world, a place left behind by the big sect Yao Yin mountain sect tens of thousands of years ago. He thought to himself, seeing that the restrictive spells here are intact, there must be a place where the evil earth is planted. If I can bring a few back and fill up my abode, I won't need to ask for it from that sect and won't be controlled by others. The evil earth was not like the elixir. If the elixir had been around for a long time, no matter how well it was preserved, it would still lose its medicinal properties. But the evil earth was different. As long as it was carefully cultivated, it could evolve on its own. As long as the spiritual energy in the veins did not decline, it would never dry up. The trees here were lush and flourishing. Especially the restrictive spells did not decline. If the evil earth was preserved, it would not easily disperse. Looking at the palaces in front of him, Zhang Yan's eyes lit up. Even the Qinsang school did not have many evil earth that had been around for tens of thousands of years. Although he had obtained a continent of the Su clan and there were a few evil earth spiritual veins on it, the best ones in the Su clan had already been taken by the sect. These few were not as good as the ones given by Jinren Peng, so he did not care about them. He wanted to find a few more, but now that he saw this place, he could not help but think about it. He looked back and forth and roughly glanced at the temples. There were at least 100 of them, but he did not know where the evil earth was hiding. He changed his mind and thought that he could only go up the mountain first. He would have to take one step at a time. At this time, many disciples came out of the formation door and appeared at the foot of the mountain. Among them, there were a few people who were surrounded by people, and they were in high spirits. Looking at their attire and dressing, and looking at the immortal beasts they were riding, it was obvious that they were the disciples of the Southern Flower sect. Zhang Yan intentionally avoided this group of people and turned into a wisp of smoke. He walked towards a secluded place. When he arrived at the entrance of a mountain path, he raised his eyes to look and saw a lone figure flying along the ridge of the mountain. After pondering for a moment, he knew that there ought to be a restriction that enveloped the entire mountain, and no one could leap to the peak of the mountain. That was why there were such rules and regulations. After a few glances, he flicked his sleeves and flew up. He flew along the mountain path at a moderate speed. After a short while, he saw a winding path ahead of him. There was an additional rugged stone staircase, and on top of it was an imposing temple. The few figures in front of him had already disappeared. After pondering for a while, he also landed on the cloud and stepped into the main hall. This monastery was filled with large pillars made of gold and bronze. There were strange beasts carved with profound patterns, and the jade bricks beneath their feet were untainted by even a speck of dust. It was obvious that the restrictive formation still existed. In the middle of the main hall, there was a stone tablet that was 30 feet tall, and there were a dozen cultivators in different attire pointing at it. Someone said loudly, everyone, the restrictive formation in this hall is complicated, and if we can't break it, we won't be able to force our way in. Just now, there were a few Taoists who rashly went in, and they were injured by the formation and had to retreat. However, there was also a Taoist who was unlucky and got trapped inside. Immediately, someone said, "Just now on another mountain path, I saw a Taoist from the Shaoqing sect, and he just raised his sword to cut open a path." However, when others tried again, they couldn't do it anymore. Zhang Yan thought to himself, "I never thought that there would be a few people from the Shaoqing sect here." However, with the personalities of the Shaoqing sect's disciples, other than swords, there's nothing else. I think they're not here for some ancestor's treasure. They're probably here to find opponents to sharpen their swords. The person who spoke first smiled bitterly and said, "Shaoqing sect is the #1 sect in Xianmen, and their disciples carry good treasures with them. Small sects like us can't compare to them." Moreover, when that senior brother tried to force his way in with his sword, the formation only paused for a moment before it spun again. Only one person went through, so didn't the others still fail? In my opinion, why don't I wait here for a while and wait for a few Taoists to come and see if we can work together to break the restriction? Everyone had tried to work together earlier, but they were still a little lacking. Right now, they didn't have any other good ideas, and no one objected to this suggestion. Thus, they retreated to the sides and sat on one side. Some people walked around, knocking and knocking to see if they could find any treasures. This restriction was originally used by the disciples of this sect to go up and down in the past. They only needed to cast a spell, and they would be able to enter the higher halls, so there was no need to go up step by step. However, everyone didn't know the profoundness of it, so it became a tiger blocking their way. Someone sighed and said, "To be able to create this boundary, it must be a big sect from thousands of years ago. Looking at the restriction formation, it's not damaged, so there might be many good things left behind. What do you think, Taoists?" Someone continued and said loudly, "This Taoist is right. Since we're different from those big sect's disciples, there's no need to be too anxious." Everyone nodded, and all of them deeply agreed. If this place was really left behind by a big sect in the past, it was unknown how many good things were left behind. Disciples of small sects like them all placed their sights on cultivation techniques, magic treasures, and spirit pills, whereas those immortal palaces and earth terminus spirit veins were what those big sects' disciples needed. If it wasn't so, they wouldn't have the confidence to fight for it. At this time, Zhang Yan walked to the stone tablet alone, and his eyes stared at the restriction on it as if he was lost in thought. Someone kindly reminded him, "Fellow Taoist, there's no need to be anxious. Wait for another half a day, and I'm sure many fellow Taoists will come. At that time, we'll work together to break it." Zhang Yan didn't pay attention to him, and he stood silently before the stone tablet for a moment. He found that it wasn't difficult to break through this restriction, so he took a step forward and relied on his body that was as hard as metal to charge forward. With a bang, the hall trembled, and his figure disappeared. The disciples present were all stunned, and a slightly quick-witted person slapped his forehead and jumped up as he said with wild joy, "So that's how it is." He impatiently walked forward and stood there for a moment like Zhang Yan, and then he used all the strength in his body to collide with the stone tablet. Bang! He staggered back and fell backwards, and he lay on the ground with his head broken and bleeding. Everyone in the surroundings glanced at each other and were astounded. Zhang Yan came out from the restriction formation, and he noticed that he was standing on a small square that was around an acre in size. On his left was a 30 kilometers deep ravine, and on his right was a cliff. When he raised his head to look, he saw a pergola at the top, and it was built by relying on the mountain to merge with the cliff. It was extremely precipitous, and a waterfall flowed down and emitted rumbling sounds. Not far in front of him, there was a golden gourd floating in the air, and it spewed out thick clouds of smoke. A Taoist sat on it, and he held a deer antler-shaped magic tool in his hand. His eyes were closed, and there were bloodstains on his chest, as if he was injured. A person who looked like a disciple was standing guard at the side, and when he saw Zhang Yan, he coldly said, Just now, there are traces of a demon pretending to be a cultivator of my profound sect. Which disciple are you? Hurry up and report your name, and don't make a mistake. Zhang Yan swept his gaze around, and he cupped his hands. I'm Xian Yuanzi, an independent cultivator of the Eastern Sea. How should I address you? The young cultivator took a few careful glances at him as if he was trying to find some flaws. In the end, he snorted and put away his sword. He returned the greeting and said, I am a disciple of Tai House Sect's Shichui Mountain. This is my martial uncle. Just now, there is a demon who knows where he came from wreaking havoc here, and he has been fighting with us for a long time. Later, he retreated with injuries, so be careful, fellow Taoist. Zhang Yan smiled. So it's a fellow Taoist from the Taihao school. 30 years ago, I was friends with your sect's spiritual master Han Guzi in the outer endless sea. I haven't seen you for many years, how are you? The young cultivator was startled, and then he smiled. Good, good. Before I left the mountain, I even met this spiritual master once. Zhang Yan smiled, and he squinted his eyes. May I know which demon lord you are under? The young Taoist's expression did not change, and he frowned. What do you mean, fellow Taoist? Don't make such a joke. Zhang Yan shook his head and sighed. Fellow Taoist, even if you pretend to be from the Taihao school, you should know that Han Guzi is from the condensed jade manor, and he has never left the sect for 100 years, so how can you say that you met me 30 years ago? Other than that, fellow Taoist has too many flaws, so you must have set it up in a hurry. It can deceive those ignorant people, but it can't deceive I. When the young Taoist heard that, he did not say anything at first, and then he laughed out loud. As his laughter drifted away, the image of the Taoist on the gourd also drifted away. It was actually an illusion. This Taoist's appearance was not fake. Just now, he used this method to take advantage of the respect that itinerant cultivators had for the disciples of the big sects, and he had already obtained many people's vitality essence, as well as many magic treasures. With such a good deal, he was not tired of it. It was a pity that those people could pass through that restriction, and their abilities were not weak, but they died here mysteriously and lost their lives. The young Taoist tidied his clothes and bowed. I am Jiuming sect's direct disciple, Kai Shen. May I know your real name, fellow Taoist? Zhang Yan stood with his hands behind his back and smiled faintly. Qinsang, Zhang Yan. At that moment, 50 kilometers away from Mount Qingtong, the bald Taoist was meditating with his eyes closed. Su Gongyuan was guarding beside him, and his expression was rather vigilant. After a while, the bald Taoist slowly opened his eyes, and Su Gongyuan hurriedly said, Jinren, how is it? The bald Taoist chuckled. I've already found out about the physical body I seized. This is indeed the location of the Yaoyin Mountain Gate in the past. My dead master uncle did not lie to me. Green light flickered in his eyes as he said, now that the world has changed and our spiritual gate is flourishing, this demon palace has appeared in response to fate. If I can obtain this inheritance, I can also establish a sect overseas and form a grotto heaven like Tao Jinhong. Su Gongyuan took a breath and hesitated. A few days ago, I accidentally saw 3 Yuanying cultivators from the big Xianmen sects entering Mount Qingtong. The bald Taoist was displeased. With me here, what are you afraid of? Su Gongyuan took a step back and said in a muffled voice, then what are you going to do? The Taoist laughed out loud. He raised his hand and made a chopping motion. He scoffed. What else can I do? I'll just kill them all. Chapter 373. Just now, when Zhang Yan reported his name, Kaishen's body trembled as if he had heard of his name before. He exclaimed, Zhang Yan. Zhang Yan had achieved the first rank of core and was one of the top 10 disciples of Qinsang school. His reputation had long spread throughout the Donghua continent. Kai Shen was a disciple of the Devil's Doctrine and knew that when the Devil's calamity began, there would be a battle between Xianmen and the Devil's Path. How could he not pay attention to Zhang Yan's name? He knew that Yi Futian's flying sword technique was extremely impressive, so he hurriedly made a hand seal and a bright light appeared on his body. A gust of wind swept up from the ground and flew into the air, as if he did not dare to stand in front of Yi Futian for even a moment. But he moved a little too late. How could Zhang Yan let go of such a good opportunity? Taking advantage of the fact that the opponent had not gone far, Zhang Yan let out a shout. The mysterious yellow hand exploded out from the top of his head with a loud rumble. It stretched forward, spread open its fingers, and swiftly grabbed towards the opponent. Kai Xiu's abdomen swelled up. He opened his mouth and spat out a thick yellow smoke. When the yellow hand came into contact with it, there was a sizzling sound, and the 5 fingers were corroded. However, his expression did not relax. He stretched out his hand and grabbed the gourd that was thrown in the distance. He bit off the cork, raised his hand, and poured the gourd downwards. Countless sparkling yellow sand poured down, rumbling like an avalanche. Zhang Yan calmly shook his shoulder and formed the yellow hand of light again. He flipped his palm and held it up towards the sky. With a dull sound, he held up the endless yellow sand. However, the yellow sand was like a wave crashing against a dam. It surged down from above with a destructive force. Layer after layer, it seemed to fall down in an unending stream. Not long after, it pressed down on the mysterious yellow hand. In order to deal with Zhang Yan, he used all the skills that he was proud of. It was not that he was too careful, but that Zhang Yan's reputation was too great. He could not be careless, so he had to use all his skills to deal with him. Seeing this situation, Zhang Yan thought of something and took out the tin mother pot from his sleeve pocket. He poured a grain of scarlet thunder sand into his palm. His eyes flashed. He had only heard of how powerful this thing was. However, he had never seen it before. At this moment, he might as well use this person to test it out so that he could have an idea of what was going on. With that thought, he flicked his finger and sent the item flying. Kai Shen saw a scarlet light flying towards him. He didn't know what it was, but he didn't dare to underestimate it. Seeing that it was coming at him very quickly, he hurriedly sent a cloud of smoke over, wanting to block it and see what it was before dealing with it. However, the crimson thunder gravel could not withstand the collision at all. Upon contact, it exploded. In a split second, it was as if a clap of thunder had exploded in their ears. A scarlet flame flashed past, and the entire sky was filled with flames and smoke. Kai Shen's vision suddenly darkened. A sharp pain came from his body, and when the smoke dispersed, he was shocked to find that one of his arms was gone, leaving only his bare shoulder, and the gourd was nowhere to be seen. He looked down again. From the abdomen down, half of his body had been blown up without a trace. The broken part was charred black, and it was too horrible to look at. He let out a miserable howl and immediately abandoned his body. A spirit escaped from the top of his head, and he made a hand sign. With a shake, it turned into a wisp of smoke, and was about to float away to escape. Seeing this, Zhang Yan took a deep breath, and then shouted at it. With a boom, a rumbling explosion came out, and he seemed to be swept by an invisible wild wind. The mountain rocks rolled, the grass and trees fell, and it was a mess. The smoke was hit, and it trembled. The blurry face showed a trace of sadness, and then like snow melting in the sun, it disintegrated. Zhang Yan looked at the broken body that fell down, and he had some understanding of the power of the scarlet thunder gravel. He also sighed for a while. It really was a sharp weapon to kill the enemy. Kai Shen's cultivation was similar to his, but when he was hit by the thunder gravel, he could not resist it at all. Although the reason for this was because of the opponent's carelessness, he still had more than 300 scarlet thunder beads. If he had thrown them out, even if the opponent had a magic treasure to protect him, he would have been blown to pieces. He was about to deal with the broken body, but at this time, an idea suddenly appeared in his mind. After thinking carefully, he released the water element True Light, and poured out a ball of something. This thing was originally gathered into a ball, and as soon as it came out, it scattered with a bang. Then it let out a buzzing sound, and bit towards Zhang Yan. This thing was the bloodline gold worm that was sucked into the water element true light a few days ago. After being in the water element true light for so long, although their bodies had shrunk a lot compared to before, the strange thing was that they actually hugged each other and floated along the water, not dying. Zhang Yan sneered at the sight of the bloodline gold beetles lunging at him. With a wave of his true light, the bloodline gold beetles were tossed around in the water. After tossing and turning, the bloodline gold beetles were half dead, and Zhang Yan shook them out again. These bloodline gold insects really didn't change their nature. They once again made Zhang Yan their target and rushed forward. However, their fate was no different from before, and they once again crashed into the water element true light. Like this, Zhang Yan repeatedly tried dozens of times, and no matter how slow these bloodline gold worms were, they still had a trace of intelligence. They knew that the person in front of them could not be provoked, so they did not dare to attack again. It was just that they had not eaten for a long time, and were very hungry. After circling around, they saw the remains of the body on the ground, and without being picky, they swarmed up, and in the blink of an eye, swallowed it whole. Even the spiritual tools and robes on the body were not spared, and were eaten clean. At this time, Zhang Yan just now noticed that these bloodline gold worms did not act separately, but always followed the head of the worm. His heart moved, and with a point of his finger, a wisp of smoke flew out, caught the worm, and threw it towards the water element true light. Sure enough, wherever the head worm went, the group of worms followed. Without Zhang Yan urging them, they all fell into the water element true light. Zhang Yan nodded unconsciously, and thought to himself, I'll keep these worms first, they might be of great use at a critical moment. He kept the water element true light, and looked at a temple on Dingyuan Peak. He leaped up and flew towards it. At the same time, the two cultivators from Huanjin Temple climbed up the peak, and they had already passed by 4 temples. The more they walked, the more surprised they were. Because of the prohibition, all the palaces and objects were undamaged, as if they were newly built. They arrived at the top of a peak, and looked at this place. Looking up at the flowing clouds, and looking down at the mountains and rivers, it was magnificent. The middle-aged Taoist could not help but sigh, and suddenly said, Today in Xianmen, Shaoqing, Qinsang, and Yuxiao sects stand side by side. If this place belongs to our sect, after 1,000 years, we will definitely be able to divide Donghua. The thin-bearded cultivator beside him shook his head and said, Senior brother you're thinking too much. Now, not to mention the small sects and unorthodox sects, even the disciples of the 10 sects of Xianmen have gathered here, like Kang Tong from Shaoqing sect, Fang Zhenlu from Qinsang school, and Zui Mo from Yuxiao school. Their status in the sect is not low, especially Fang Zhenlu, who is one of the top 10 disciples of Qinsang school. How could they not go back and report this? If there are no accidents, this small world will definitely be divided by the 10 sects of Xianmen. Although there was a sense of pity in his words, he also felt that it was a matter of course. However, Senior Brother Yu's eyes shone with a strange light, and he said, Junior brother, you're wrong. This is such a good place, if we don't try it, how will we know that it won't belong to Huanjin Temple? The thin-bearded cultivator asked curiously, Then what do you plan to do, Senior Brother? Senior Brother Yu stroked his beard and smiled, and he said with a deep smile, We can enter but not leave, isn't this a great opportunity? The thin-bearded cultivator was shocked, and he turned around and stared at Senior Brother Yu. Senior Brother, you want to? Senior Brother Yu stretched out a hand to stop him from continuing, saying with a smile, Junior Brother, why would you have such an idea, although I am also in the Yuanying realm, but I am not arrogant to the point where I want to wipe out all the people here. I just want to say that I am not the only capable person in this small world, I do not believe that they do not have any selfish thoughts, if there are, we can make good use of it, maybe there will be a pleasant surprise. He understood very well that if this place could be entered at will, then the result would be the same as what his junior brother said, but since it was extremely difficult to leave this place, and if there were disciples of the demonic sect sneaking in, then there would be too many variables. He did not need to do it directly, as long as he gave a little push, he might be able to achieve what he wanted. As for what the result would be, he would see when the time comes. Thinking too much now was just asking for trouble. At the foot of the mountain, a white jade archway flashed into view, and after a flash of light, Strange Taoist and Su Gongyuan came out one after another. Strange Taoist rolled his eyes, then narrowed his eyes, scanning the world. He drew a deep breath and chuckled, seemingly quite satisfied with this place, clapping his hands. Good, this really is the place to establish a sect, it should belong to me, Zhang Boyan. After laughing, he suddenly turned his head and stared fiercely at Su Gongyuan. The latter couldn't help but be shocked and took 2 steps back. However, he still maintained a calm expression on his face and said, Spiritual Master Zhang, what are you? Zhang Boyan laughed. Su Gongyuan, don't be afraid, I ask you, are you willing to be bait for me? When he came here, he had already ascertained that besides him, there were 3 other Yuanying masters, namely Yu Yuji of Anata sect, Mo Tianxin of Yuanyang sect, and Qing Yinglin of Nanhua sect. These 3 people's cultivation level was not far from his, although he had the confidence to fight one-on-one, but he must pay a price. If he could find an opportunity to secretly kill them one by one, then this little world would be his. Su Gongyuan was taken aback. As a fellow demonic sect cultivator, he almost immediately guessed the other party's plan, but now that he had entered this little world, there were many mysterious sect disciples here, and his identity as a demonic sect cultivator was the most shameful. Under such circumstances, there was no room for him to oppose. Even if the other party did not take his life, he had no way out. Although there was hatred in his heart, but on the surface there was no hesitation. Junior will listen to spiritual master's arrangements. Zhang Boyan chuckled, very good, you are a smart person, as long as you listen to my orders, help me seize this little world, I can avenge you. Su Gongyuan hurriedly put on an expression of gratitude and said, thank you, Jinren. Then, he put on an enthusiastic expression and asked, where should we go now? Zhang Boyan's voice became cold. First go find that old Mo of Yuanyang sect. This person is an old acquaintance of mine. Since we came here together, how can I not go and say hello to him? Chapter 374. The Yuanyang sect was a big sect, and its disciples were always eye-catching. It only took a little bit of investigation to find out where they were going. Zhang Boyan and Su Gongyuan didn't have to spend too much effort to follow them. Within half an hour, they had caught up with the group of people from Yuanyang sect. There were 3 of them, 2 of them were boys, and the last one was a Taoist priest, who was wearing a primeval crown and had a square face. They stood in front of a palace for a short while, then broke the defensive formation and entered the palace. Zhang Boyan's eyes flickered, then he patted Su Gongyuan's shoulder and said, Su Gongyuan, you can go up now. Remember what I told you, don't make any mistakes. Su Gongyuan bowed and said, don't worry, Taoist. I won't let you down. Zhang Boyan made a sound of indifference, then glanced at him and said, I trust you. Su Gongyuan bowed again, took a deep breath, and walked up the stairs. In the palace, the Yuanyang sect's elder Mo Tianxin looked up and saw a huge cauldron standing in front of the palace. There were 6 jade steps, and 3 golden bridges leading to a high platform. On the top of the platform, there were 3 cattail hassocks, surrounding a bronze incense burner. On the wall of the incense burner, there were many patterns of strange beasts. He stroked his beard and said, this should be the place where the Yaoyin clan concoct pellets. At this moment, a boy beside him suddenly exclaimed. Mo Tianxin looked sideways and saw a demonic dragon coiling on a bronze pillar not far away. Its eyes were blood red, and it looked ferocious. Mo Tianxin's expression didn't change. He patted the boy's back and comforted him, boy, don't be afraid. This is just a dragon sculpture. When the boy heard this, he boldly took a few steps forward. Only then did he understand that the 2 eyes were made of blood coral beads. However, there were flames circulating within the beads, making it look very lifelike. In addition, the demonic dragon's body was coiled and twisted, its scales and claws looked like they were real. At first glance, it almost seemed as if it was swimming. The boy raised his head. He asked curiously, Master, isn't the Yaoyin clan an orthodox sect? How could there be such a ferocious sculpture? Mo Tianxin said in a low voice, rumor has it that old ancestor Tai Heng is the son of Mo Jiao. Although he admires the righteous Tao, very few people are willing to accept him. Later, he joined the devil sect in a fit of anger. Since then, every time he goes to a place, he must carve a Jiao dragon, as if he is angry with others. This was the first time the two boys had heard of such an interesting story. They listened with great interest. Mo Tianxin suddenly frowned and turned his head to stare at the door. A cold light flashed in his eyes as he shouted, Who is outside? Why is there a need to be so sneaky? Just now, Su Gongyuan had reached the door of the hall. Although he was mentally prepared, but when he really had to face a Yuanying cultivator alone, he was secretly nervous. He was also secretly nervous. He calmed himself down and raised his voice according to what Zhang Boyan said, Senior, I am from the Huanjin Temple. Don't attack. As he spoke, he took a step into the hall. However, he had only taken a single step when he heard a cold laugh from within. Demon, could it be that you think you can deceive me? Su Gongyuan couldn't help but curse in his heart. He didn't know where he had seen through the flaw. Without thinking too much, he shook his hand and a colorful miasma appeared. He turned around and was about to fly out. Mo Tianxin glanced at the colorful miasma. Although it was very beautiful, it was just a poisonous miasma commonly used by the devil sect. A mocking expression appeared on his face. He said, In front of me, how can you come and go as you please? With a flick of his hand, a dazzling sword light flew out. Su Gongyuan saw that it wasn't fast and wanted to avoid it with the smoke. However, he was shocked to find that the sword light seemed to have a spirit. No matter where he went, he couldn't avoid it. In the end, like a fish jumping out of the water, it rushed forward and then turned around and rushed down. With a pu sound, it killed him in midair and firmly nailed him to the ground. Su Gongyuan turned pale with fright and hurriedly struggled. However, he found that not only could he not break free, but even his primordial spirit couldn't escape. He was a third-level core transformation cultivator, but in front of spiritual master Yuanying, he actually didn't have the strength to fight back. While he was shocked, he also secretly complained. Although Zhang Boyan previously vowed that he didn't need to worry about his life, he didn't know if the other party would keep his promise and come to save him. Mo Tianxin walked out of the main hall. He first looked at Su Gongyuan, then he looked around vigilantly. He frowned slightly and took out a talisman. He handed it to the boy beside him and said, Go seal him with the talisman and capture him. I have something to ask him. The boy complied and took the talisman. Just as he was about to step forward, Mo Tianxin's expression changed slightly. He shouted loudly and a golden Yuanying leaped out of the door. In a split second, it released countless rays of golden light and multicolored clouds, enveloping the surrounding area of 100 feet. Being illuminated by this golden light, a faint shadow suddenly flashed and revealed its true form. It was a Yuanying that rushed straight towards him. Its body was surging with turbid air and black smoke that was so thick that it seemed like it couldn't be dispersed. Mo Tianxin was startled and sneered, Zhang Boyan, so you are this old devil. He saw that it was rushing towards him and couldn't help but hesitate. When this Yuanying formed its nascent soul, it condensed western pure gold, grand white aura, and heavenly astral sand. After it was formed, it was solid and indestructible. It was difficult for external techniques to injure it and all kinds of evils couldn't enter it. Normal devil chi that tried to invade its body would be dispersed by the sword-like chi before it could even reach its body. At this moment, if it was an ordinary devil Dao disciple rushing towards him, he wouldn't be afraid at all. He would raise his hand and strike with his sword. However, his opponent was a cultivator from the Netherworld Spring Gate. The Netherworld chi around his body had the effect of corroding bones and flesh. It had the effect of polluting magic power. If even a little bit of it came into contact with him, it could injure the soul. It was one of the few filthy chis that could hurt him. If he raised his sword and attacked at this moment, it was very likely that he could seriously injure this person, but he would inevitably be injured. After a few thoughts flashed through his mind, Yuanying stretched out his hand and pointed. In an instant, countless sword lights flew out and turned into a fine net to obstruct the other party. He originally thought that the other party would definitely avoid the sharp edge, and then he could counterattack. However, he didn't know if this Zhang Boyan had gone crazy or something else. The Yuanying that he had painstakingly cultivated actually didn't care about the sword lights at all. He risked being cut by the chaotic swords and desperately rushed towards him. In an instant, he was only 2 feet away from him. Mo Tianxin's pupils shrank. He knew that something was wrong and was about to kill. Who would have thought that at this moment, Su Gongyuan, who was lying there on the verge of death, would suddenly open his eyes and take out a jade mirror from his sleeve. He waved it in front of Su Gongyuan, and in an instant, a ray of light rushed out. Although it was blocked by the golden light emitted by the nascent soul and didn't hurt Su Gongyuan, it still couldn't help but tremble. At this extremely critical moment, any small flaw could change the situation of the battle. Mo Tianxin originally had all his attention on Zhang Boyan and was caught off guard. The killing move that he was about to release was immediately delayed. Zhang Boyan was waiting for this opportunity. His eyes were green with fire and he shouted loudly. He fiercely closed in to within 3 feet of him. This Yuanying of him stretched out his hand and a talisman with a blood-colored seal script appeared. He slapped it on Mo Tianxin's Yuanying body, then a second, a third. He waved his hands non-stop, making crackling sounds, and regardless of anything, he pasted it on his body. Mo Tianxin felt the bursts of heavy pressure coming from the talisman, as if it wanted to seal him. He couldn't help but shout. Sword chi surged and golden light burst out. In an instant, these talismans were cut apart. He was about to use another technique to injure the other party. That Zhang Boyan pasted another talisman. Mo Tianxin's Yuanying body stiffened again. He was shocked to find that if he wanted to injure the other party, he had to completely remove these talismans. He couldn't let any of them touch his body. Otherwise, the other party would take a hit from his sword. If he didn't die, it wouldn't take long for him to be completely suppressed. Zhang Boyan completely didn't care what he thought. His hands moved faster and faster. Without a word, he pasted talismans one after another. Such a crazy action seemed to have angered Mo Tianxin, but he had no choice but to attack the other party. Every time a talisman came up, he would use sword chi to cut it off. The two of them didn't have time to do anything else. You pasted a talisman, I'll cut it off. The speed was getting faster and faster, as if both of them wanted to be ahead of the other party. Mo Tianxin sneered. He could guess what the other party was planning. However, his sword chi moved according to his heart. He didn't believe that it could be faster than him. As long as he could catch his breath, even if it was a little faster, he would be able to kill this devil on the spot. However, after a few breaths, he suddenly felt that something was wrong. His Yuanying was getting heavier and heavier, as if it was not moving at all. At first, he didn't know what the problem was, but after thinking about it, just now, he suddenly realized. The problem lay in the cloud of smoke that Su Gongyuan had just scattered. He made a mistake at first. He didn't expect that it could actually pass through the golden light that protected his Yuanying body and corrode it. As the filthy gas accumulated, it finally made it difficult for him to circulate his mana. Usually, this filthy poisonous gas was nothing to him. He would get rid of it as soon as it entered. However, he was using all his strength to fight against Zhang Boyan. When the two of them fought, life and death could be determined in an instant. How could he allow any delay? Pa! At this moment, Zhang Boyan finally had a talisman firmly stuck on Mo Tianxin's Yuanying body. He grinned and another talisman appeared in his other hand. He slammed it down heavily. Then, more and more talismans stuck on it. At this time, Mo Tianxin needed a few breaths. Just now, he could break one talisman. However, compared to the opponent's fast movements, it was already useless. At this time, he couldn't even escape. He couldn't help but say hatefully, "Old demon Zhang, do you think that by taking my yuanying, you can master that 3-in undying body?" Zhang Boyan didn't seem to hear his words. His hands didn't stop moving, slapping back and forth until the strange blood-red talisman was stuck on the entire yuanying body. The golden light on it also gradually dimmed. Mo Tianxin's face was full of unwillingness, regret, fear, and other expressions. When the last talisman slapped heavily on the top of the yuanying's head, Zhang Boyan suddenly opened his mouth and swallowed the yuanying into his body. And Mo Tianxin's body trembled. Blood flowed from the 7 apertures of his head and he fell straight to the ground. Zhang Boyan's face showed a trace of a sinister smile. He pounced on him and sucked all the blood and flesh from his body. Then, he turned around and also pulled in the 2 children who were eroded by the devil qi. After doing all this, his yuanying returned to his body that was sitting dozens of feet away with a bang. Then, he kept panting and his face became pale. The battle just now seemed to be going smoothly for him, but in fact, if he was slightly careless, even if he was just a little bit slower, he would immediately be cut into pieces by the chaotic swords. If that was the case, his hundreds of years of cultivation would be destroyed overnight. And when he rushed forward, if Mo Tianxin didn't care about his own injuries and slashed with his sword, although Mo Tianxin would definitely be seriously injured, he wouldn't have the slightest chance of survival. He might not even be able to keep his life. But now, he gambled correctly. At that moment, Mo Tianxin's mind was deceived. Not only did he not do that, but he also chose to protect himself. This gave Su Gongyuan the opportunity to make a move, allowing him to steal the opponent's yuanying. Zhang Boyan couldn't help but let out a wild laugh and said, "The heavens bless my Ling Gate. The luck is with me, the luck is with me." Then, his voice sank. He licked his dry lips and said in a gloomy voice, "Cheng Yinglin, the next one is you. If you like this work, you are welcome to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation." Chapter 375. Zhang Yan passed through halls and halls, passing through several observation pavilions. Along the way, he didn't encounter any more restrictions. Halfway up the mountain, they arrived in front of the last hall on the mountain path. Between the mountains, the sea of clouds surged, relaxing and faintly discernible. Although they had already reached an extremely high point, they were still 2 mountains away from the highest peak. This mountain peak was protected by restrictions. If there was no path, Zhang Yan couldn't just fly around, in case he triggered some formation. While he was searching, his eyes swept across and saw that there was a plankway staircase between the mountain walls. It seemed to lead to another mountain ridge. He couldn't help but smile. He leaped up and flew along the steep narrow path. When he passed this place, all he could see were caves and caves. The number of caves were arranged according to the heavenly stems and earthly branches. It was very orderly. Zhang Yan had once stayed in the lower courtyard, so he was familiar with this scene. He thought to himself, this should be the place where the lower disciples of the Yaoyin sect used to live. It seems that the halls we saw when we came here are where the lower courtyard of the Yaoyin sect is located. In just a moment, he saw the end of the plankway. He followed the path and turned left. Suddenly, he saw a giant stone that was 100 feet in front of him. However, it was heavy at the top and light at the bottom. It seemed like if someone pushed it from behind, it would collapse. Zhang Yan saw that this place seemed to be a dead end. He raised his eyebrows and went around the back of the giant stone. Sure enough, on the stone wall behind it, there were 2 caves that were about 1,000 feet deep. He could vaguely see the light from the other side. He smiled. His feet didn't touch the ground as he flew in. After a while, the sky was bright. He squinted his eyes and landed on the ground. This place should be halfway up the second peak. The land was flat and open, surrounded by countless lush trees. There was a 3-cave mountain gate with flying eaves and a statue of a demon dragon climbing on the roof. It looked fierce. In front of the gate, there was a cypress tree that was so thick that it would take 10 people to wrap their arms around it. Going straight up the mountain path, one could see an octagonal pagoda in the distance. With Zhang Yan's eyesight, he could even see the sapphire glazed tiles covering it. It seemed to be draped in a layer of bright yellow cloth, and under the eaves hung a copper bat bell. In his heart, he secretly thought that such a shape, in a sect, was probably not an ordinary place. Stomping his feet, he turned into a wisp of green smoke and passed through the mountain gate, flying along the mountain path. Almost instantly, they arrived at the foot of the tower. Only then did he see that the octagonal pagoda had 16 floors, all built with polished jade, and the bottom was surrounded by jade railings. Zhang Yan stepped on the void and slowly floated over. He noticed that the way in and out was also paved with jade slabs. It was engraved with patterns of turtles and cranes, as well as patterns of auspicious clouds. A restriction profound stele was erected in front of the pagoda, and a star diagram could be vaguely seen on it. However, it was already badly damaged. It should have been broken by someone using brute force not long ago. Hearing that there seemed to be human voices, the moment Zhang Yan landed, he stepped inside. After entering, he was surprised to find that there were actually dozens of cultivators in different attire sitting cross-legged facing the wall, and all of them seemed to be circulating their mana. What were they refining? He looked up and saw that on the walls of the pagoda, there were rows of shrines, and every one of them had a magical artifact. All of them emitted light, and all of them were dazzling. After a rough look, there were probably more than 300 of them. In his heart, he immediately understood. This pagoda was probably where the Yaoyin clan disciples placed their magical artifacts, and it might even be the place where they refined artifacts in the past. However, every single one of the treasures was sealed by a restrictive technique. As such, each of the cultivators had chosen one and were working hard to refine it. Zhang Yan was one of the top 10 disciples of the Qinsang school, and he even had a few true artifacts. His vision was very high, so he naturally wasn't interested in these magical artifacts. However, this was only the first floor of the pagoda. This pagoda had a total of 16 floors, and there might be more up there. His heart moved, and he didn't look at these people as he walked up. The dozens of cultivators below let out a sigh of relief when they saw him go up. Most of these people were at the first or second level of the mystic light realm. Although Zhang Yan had changed his appearance, his cultivation was still there. Just now, he gave them a lot of pressure when he came in. Almost everyone's back was stiff, and they didn't dare to look back. Zhang Yan moved rather quickly. After passing through 9 floors in a row, he discovered that all of them were ordinary magic tools, which were no different from the first floor. Moreover, there were more than 10 cultivators circulating their magic power to refine the restrictions on each floor. When he walked up, one of them coincidentally obtained a magical artifact, and joy appeared in his eyes. However, he didn't have time to be happy for long. He saw a cultivator next to him also succeed, and his expression changed drastically. He then quickly ran toward another magical artifact that he had his eyes on. Only after he took that spot would he be able to relax. When Zhang Yan reached the 14th floor, he saw the spiritual artifacts on the shrine platforms around him just now. He looked around and saw that there weren't many cultivators here compared to below. There were only a few people, but what caught his attention was that there were a few empty shrines. The magic treasures were long gone. Looking at the traces, it was obvious that someone had taken them not long ago. When Zhang Yan came up, the mystic light realm cultivator closest to him saw wisps of smoke dancing around him and knew that he was a core formation cultivator. His expression changed slightly, and he didn't dare to look at him for too long before turning his head back. At this moment, Zhang Yan suddenly heard a voice coming from the upper floor. However, the voice was very casual and seemed to be very relaxed. When he walked up, all the cultivators he saw were working hard to refine the restrictions, but the people on the upper floor were so relaxed and even had the mood to talk. It was obvious that they didn't care about these magical artifacts at all. They were undoubtedly disciples of big sections. He walked up the stairs, and when he reached the 15th floor, he saw more than 10 cultivators standing together. There were both males and females, and they were pointing at a magical artifact that looked like a jade flute. His gaze turned and he was surprised. He thought to himself, why is Fang Zhenlu here as well? He came here many days earlier than me. I thought he would have already reached the first peak by now. Actually, a month ago, when the treasure light of the Qing Tong mountain appeared, although the formation door had already appeared, no one dared to go in recklessly. It was only when the various sects used secret techniques to find out what was inside that they dared to go in boldly. Only now did they dare to go in. Because of this, they were delayed for a few days. Actually, most people had only entered here 1 or 2 days earlier than Zhang Yan. Moreover, there were many restrictions at the foot of the mountain. The reason why Zhang Yan didn't encounter any on his way here was because the people who went in first had already broken them. Therefore, the speed of the journey naturally couldn't be faster, which was why they met here. Fang Zhenlu laughed loudly and said, Brother Kong is a talented disciple of the Shaoqing sect. It shouldn't be hard for him to break the restrictions here. A young Taoist wearing a green robe didn't say much. He laughed and a sword light suddenly flashed. Everyone looked at it and saw that the restriction on the shrine platform had been broken in an instant. They all praised. The young Taoist pointed and said with a smile, what does senior brother Fang think of Ai's swordsmanship? Fang Zhenlu revealed a look of admiration and said, good. However, there was a hint of disapproval in his eyes. Obviously, he didn't think it was anything great. The young Taoist smiled lightly. He reached in and gently plucked the jade flute, splitting it into 2. Everyone's expression changed. Even Fang Zhenlu's expression froze and he was shocked. This person used a sword light to not only break the restrictions, but also cut the magic treasure inside in half. All of them had the same thought in their hearts. If this sword slashed down towards them, then who amongst the people here would be able to resist it? Above the pavilion, there were 2 beautiful and graceful female crowns. At this time, their mouths were slightly open, and even the way they looked at senior martial brother Kong had changed a bit. Fang Zhenlu was, after all, a disciple of a major sect. After a brief moment of absent-mindedness, he regained his composure and said, Senior brother Kang's flying sword is so sharp, you must have refined that killing sword. Brother Kong nodded and admitted, you have a good eye, senior brother Fang. Among the 3 Shaoqing lineages, only the killing sword suits my taste. Zhang Yan saw it clearly from the side. As someone who was also proficient in the flying sword, only he could see the profundity of the other party's sword. He thought, so this person is a disciple of the Shaoqing sect. No wonder he's so high profile. Fang Zhenlu suddenly said, Brother Kong, speaking of the flying sword, one of the top 10 disciples of my sect, junior brother Zhang Yan, is also proficient in it. Have you heard of him? Senior brother Kang's interest was immediately piqued. Oh. Is it that fellow Taoist Zhang Yan who split his qi into 16 swords and achieved first-grade core formation? Fang Zhenlu nodded and said, that's right. Brother Kong was silent for a moment and suddenly sighed. Fang Zhenlu was surprised and said, why is senior brother sighing? Brother Kong said with pity, I think it's a pity that such a genius isn't under our Shaoqing lineage. He doesn't know the method to nurture the sword pill. No matter how talented he is, he probably won't be able to cultivate the flying sword technique to such a high level. Fang Zhenlu smiled meaningfully and said, isn't the Shaoqing sect's method open to everyone? Brother Kong raised his eyebrows and said loudly, that's right. There's nothing about our Shaoqing technique that can't be told to others. If fellow Taoist Zhang wants to see it, then come. However, he needs to be able to pass the flying swords of my senior and junior brothers. When Fang Zhenlu heard that, he just smiled and passed it by. Shaoqing sect had always made it clear that those who were interested in their technique could come to the mountain gate for a while. They only needed to defeat the disciple guarding the mountain gate. However, ever since Shaoqing took the position of the number 1 sect in Xianmen, there were very few who had the guts to come to the mountain gate for a sword duel. Not mentioning 1,000 years ago, in these 1,000 years, Nanhua sect's Taoist Feijiu was one, and Qinsang School's Luo Kitchen was another. However, none of them really entered the mountain gate. They only sparred with their sword techniques outside the mountain and obtained a draw before returning. At this moment, Brother Kong pointed to the front and said to Fang Zhenlu, "Senior Brother Fang, look at that Dharma treasure. It's not bad, why don't you take it and take a look?" Fang Zhenlu looked over and saw that it was a hammer-shaped Dharma treasure. He couldn't help but frown. He knew that the other party was secretly competing with him. He was one of the top 10 disciples of Qinsang School. In terms of status in the sect, he was even above Kang Tong. He didn't want to lose the reputation of Qinsang School in front of him. He smiled coolly and said, "All right, Brother Kong, please wait for a moment. I'll bring it over." Fang Zhenlu stood in front of the restriction and thought to himself, just now, Kang Tong showed such a method. I can't be weaker than him. He was also a quick-witted person. After thinking for a while, he came up with an idea. Chapter 376. Although what Fang Zhenlu learned was the Xuanzi True Mystic Upper Cave technique, after condensing his magic power and true seal, he mainly focused on changes when facing his enemies. When he attacked, he was not as sharp and overbearing as the Shaoqing disciples. If he wanted to destroy the restriction in one go, then he would have to break the magic treasure like Senior Brother Kong, but it would not be that easy. However, the two of them were not fighting on the battlefield, but fighting a life and death battle. So, he could make a small fuss. As long as it was passable on the surface, it would be fine. After he made up his mind, he raised his sleeve and lightly brushed the restriction. After a gust of wind, the layer of golden light that enveloped the shrine platform disappeared without a trace, revealing a magic treasure that was shaped like a stone pestle. Everyone present possessed great eyesight. When they looked carefully, they noticed that cracks were already faintly visible on the pestle-like magic treasure, and the aura of the treasure had completely dispersed. Obviously, it had already been destroyed. A few of them couldn't help but be surprised in their hearts, and they were unable to distinguish between Fang Zhenlu and Kang Tong. A faint smile appeared on Brother Kang's face, and he said, "Senior Brother Fang is brilliant." Fang Zhenlu smiled and shook his head, "I've embarrassed myself in front of Brother Kong." Fang Zhenlu first used his pill fiend to break the restriction, and then used his strength to destroy the treasure. It seemed to be a single brush, but it was actually 2 moves. Compared to Fang Kangtong's sword skill, it was a bit lacking, but he won in that his movement was unhurried and unrestrained, without the slightest bit of fiery aura. Therefore, on the surface, it was hard to tell who was the victor. At this moment, a disciple noticed the subtle atmosphere. He first coughed and said, "Everyone, this must be the place where the Yaoyin clan keeps their treasures. Everything here is arranged in an orderly manner, so they did not encounter any enemies. I wonder why they abandoned this place back then." An elder of the Chen clan stood behind Fang Zhenlu. He chuckled and said, "I've heard a thing or two about this. It is said that Yi Jiuyang was guarding an item back then. Just now, he established this sect under the orders of old ancestor Taihang. There are less than 100 disciples in the sect. According to my guess, maybe something happened to the item being guarded, or old ancestor Taihang had other orders, so he abandoned this place." Fang Zhenlu nodded and said, "Other than that, there is no good explanation." He then turned to Kang Tong and said, "We've already reached the 15th floor. We don't know what's at the top floor, so we might as well go up and take a look. What do you think, Brother Kong?" Kang Tong cultivated one of the 3 branches of Shaoqing, the fiercest killing sword art. He needed a pure state of mind, and he only had 1 sword in his hand. He did not care about any treasures. Even if there was a true artifact in front of him, he would not be tempted. His original intention in coming to this world was to find the disciple of the Devil sect to sharpen his sword. He did not know where he would go, so he did not care about Fang Zhenlu's suggestion. He said, "Since Senior Brother Fang is interested, I will not be a disappointment. Let's go take a look together." Fang Zhenlu smiled and exchanged some more pleasantries with Kang Tong. In the end, he took the lead and headed for the top floor. The 7 or 8 cultivators behind him whispered to each other. The 7 or 8 cultivators behind him whispered to each other and followed. The 7 or 8 cultivators behind him whispered to each other. Zhang Yan also went up. Although his appearance was not shocking, his core transformation cultivation could not be faked, so no one dared to ask him questions. A young cultivator who was closer to him even nodded in greeting. The group soon reached the 16th floor. Zhang Yan looked around and saw that the layout here was not much different from the 15th floor. There were more than 20 spirit treasures placed here. The treasures flickered and shone brilliantly. Zhang Yan didn't pay much attention to these treasures, but inadvertently, he caught a glimpse of one of them, and his eyes lit up. It was an arched copper book that was half a foot tall and 2 feet long. There were rows of inscriptions engraved on it, but the content was not complicated. Zhang Yan was able to decipher it in almost an instant, and he could not help but feel happy. He looked around, and when he saw that no one was paying attention to him, he calmly took a few steps forward and arrived in front of the shrine platform. With a wave of his hand, he gathered his core chi and turned it into a blade. With a single slash, he broke the restriction and placed the copper god book into his sleeve. Only when a shrine platform suddenly became empty did everyone realize that a magic treasure had been taken away. However, all the treasures here were ownerless, so anyone with the ability could take them. Thus, they didn't mind, and they seemed to have received a reminder instead. They each chose a treasure and started to refine the restriction unhurriedly. These people were all disciples of the 10 great sections. Because of their status, they were unwilling to take it, but now that this was the last floor, they did not want to return empty-handed. After all, no one would complain about having too many treasures. After obtaining this item, Zhang Yan did not want to stay here any longer and slowly walked down the tower. But Fang Zhenlu suddenly sensed something. Looking at his back, he asked the old man surnamed Chen next to him, "Senior apprentice brother, did you see the origin of that person just now?" The old man immediately became vigilant and asked, "Junior apprentice brother, is there something wrong with that person?" Fang Zhenlu flicked his finger at the restriction on the shrine platform, causing the golden talisman to shake, but it did not break. He said in a low voice, "Even if I were to break this talisman's restriction, I would not be able to do it so easily. This person was able to silently take the treasure, so he is not a nobody." A sharp light flashed in the old man's eyes as he asked, "Does junior apprentice brother suspect that this person is a disciple of the demon sect?" Fang Zhenlu did not deny it and said, "It is just a thought." The old man asked, "Should we capture this person and interrogate him?" Fang Zhenlu thought about it and finally waved his hand, "Forget it. Since we are here, we will definitely have a chance to meet again. There is no need to deliberately look for him." The old man said in a low voice, "It is just that just now he took a treasure and then left. I don't know if it is something important." Fang Zhenlu glanced at the empty shrine platform and said carelessly, "It's just a spirit artifact." After Zhang Yan left the tower, he rode a cloud and flew away. He found a secluded place and stood still. Then he took out the copper chisel from his sleeve and carefully looked at the inscriptions on it. Immediately he understood what was written on it. He smiled faintly and sent a wave of spiritual energy upward. In an instant, the copper voucher trembled and the image of mountains and rivers, as well as the illusionary image of the perilous peak and the pavilion, appeared on it. It was exactly the same as the mountain beneath his feet. Not only was this a map of the mountain, but it also included the distribution of all the temples here. Zhang Yan secretly rejoiced. Although this copper voucher was not a treasure, with it, he would be able to have a target and no longer need to wander around aimlessly. After carefully looking at it a few times, his eyes narrowed and fell on a side hall. The words, "Chaos Chi Temple," were written on the illusory jade plaque. It was only a few miles away from the peak. He raised his head to take a look, and then he flung open his sleeves and leaped over. In practically an instant, he arrived at that place and descended before a side hall. The front door was overgrown with weeds and the door had long collapsed, as if it had been destroyed by someone. Because it was done by a cultivator who came here before, it was clear that someone had already gone in to look. However, Zhang Yan was not in a hurry. His expression was calm as he walked inside. The layout of the temple here was strange. This hall was only a pavilion on the ground, and there was a large underground palace hidden in the belly of the mountain. If he did not have the copper stick to guide him, he would not have thought of exploring this place. Since he knew where the target was, it would be much easier to find it. He looked down and paced back and forth in the main hall several times. When he finished the third round, he couldn't help but stop. His eyes flashed, and he lifted his foot. With a "kacha" sound, the jade bricks under his foot cracked. Then, he flicked his sleeve, and the bricks rolled away, revealing the true appearance of the main hall. There was a 10,000-year-old river sinking wood that was 10 feet wide. It was square and seemed to be covering an entrance. Right at this moment, he suddenly heard voices outside and his eyebrows raised. Two figures flashed and walked in. They were both cultivators of the Xian light realm. They were talking and laughing, but when they looked up, they saw Zhang Yan. They hesitated for a while before one of them came up and said with a smile, "I didn't know Senior was here. My senior brother was too rash. We'll leave now, we'll leave now." Zhang Yan stood there and didn't say anything. These two were smart and didn't even dare to look at the things in the hall. They just walked out with their heads lowered. After the two of them left, Zhang Yan pondered for a moment before taking out an array flag from his sleeve. With a flick of his hand, he inserted it into the ground in front of the hall's door. This item was only an artifact, but if someone came in, he would definitely know. Returning to the front of the 10,000-year river sinking wood, he made a hand seal, and with a loud bang, the mysterious yellow hand flew out from the top of the door, grabbed down, and easily lifted it to the side. In just an instant, a murderous aura surged up. Zhang Yan didn't stop there. He controlled the yellow hand to descend once more. With a few rumbling sounds, the restriction below was broken. Then, he retracted the mysterious yellow hand and leaped inside. When he reached the bottom, he saw a row of jade stairs leading deeper into the cave. Without any hesitation, he tapped the ground with the tip of his foot and swiftly floated up, following the jade stairs downwards. Not long later, he arrived at the bottom. Looking up, he realized that the belly of the mountain seemed to be hollowed out. He didn't know how big it was. There were countless mounds of dirt and stones piled up. There were ridges built with black and white mud that crawled over the mounds. They were crooked and undulating, like coiling dragons and worms. There was no order to it. In the middle of the ridges, at the place closest to Zhang Yan, there was an earthly aura that was as red as fire. It was like molten lava, burning like charcoal. It was red hot and it was 10,000 feet long. There was another ridge next to it. In it, the earthly aura was as bright as a star, giving off a blue fluorescent halo. It laid there quietly and it was also as long. Although Zhang Yan didn't understand the theory behind it, he could guess that it should be the yin and yang mutual refinement technique of the earthly aura raising technique. These two earthly auras were originally at their extremes. However, when they were close to each other, they could use a special secret technique to connect with each other. Instead, they could complement each other and make their meridians stronger. He looked around. Just now, he saw another earthly aura that looked like this. He got up and flew. After searching one round, he found a total of 16 earthly auras. He was delighted and thought to himself, "This time, I got a great bargain. This Yaoyin clan is quite rich. These 6 earthly auras are above 10,000 years old. Even in the Qinsang school, there aren't many earthly auras of this age." Just as he was thinking, he suddenly heard a loud sound. It was as if the mountains were shaking and the earth was shaking. The entire cave dwelling shook. Chapter 377. Suddenly hearing this sound, Zhang Yan's expression changed slightly. After pondering for a moment, he guessed that someone should be forcefully attacking the restriction on the last mountain path. Because he had the guidance of the sect leader's letter, he knew that the restriction on the mountain wasn't that easy to break. Even with the help of powerful treasures and the combined efforts of several Yuanying Zenrins, it wasn't something that could be broken in a day. After thinking about it, he decided to ignore it. He couldn't miss the opportunity to collect the earth aura, so he decided to do his best to collect it first. Therefore, he didn't care about what was happening outside. He sat down cross-legged on the mound and released his core evil chi, which turned into a white smoke that circled around him. He used a spell to cover the earth evil chi and put all his attention into it. The earth aura was nurtured by the spiritual vein. When he took it, not only did he have to collect the earth aura, but he also had to collect a bit of the spiritual chi of the spiritual vein. Then, he moved it to another cave and connected it to the spiritual vein. This way, the earth aura wouldn't leak out and the earth aura would be preserved. This wasn't something that could be done in one go. He had to collect it bit by bit. He concentrated and busied himself for 7 days and 7 nights before he absorbed all the 16 earthly evils into the 16 pill bottles. However, if these earth aura weren't planted in a good cave, in less than half a month, the earth aura would be cut off and the earth aura that had been accumulated for thousands of years would disappear. Therefore, what he needed to do now was to complete the sect leader's task and return to the clear nether lake. However, at this moment, he heard a loud rumbling sound and a tremor came from beneath his feet. However, his expression was calm and he wasn't surprised at all. Over the past few days, he had heard this sound more than 10 times and the intervals between them were getting shorter and shorter. It was obvious that he wasn't far from the last hall. At this moment, he didn't want to waste any more time. He used all his strength and leaped out. After he rushed out, he turned into a cloud of smoke and rushed toward the highest peak. What he didn't know was that at the same time that the loud sound rang out, the 6 pitch-black stone pillars that rose from the ground of the entire mountain fiercely rotated. The formation door that was originally flickering outside Mount Qingtong closed with a loud bang and disappeared. It actually cut off the entrance. At this moment, almost all the cultivators from this world had gathered at the highest peak of Yaoyin Mountain. There were more than 100 people there. Standing at the very front were 2 perfected Yuanying. On the left was a skinny old Taoist with a sparse beard and a forehead full of wrinkles. This person was Nanhua Sect's Yuanying enlightened master Qinglin. He looked outside the mountain in a daze and stomped his feet. He sighed, "Junior brother Yu, I already said that this restriction can't be touched. Look, it really is so. Now that the restriction on the mountain path has been broken, we can go to the last hall. However, this has caused the formation outside the door to be closed. If this continues, who knows what kind of trouble it will cause." The person he was complaining about was the pair of martial brothers from Huanjin Temple. The person in the lead was the other perfected Yuanying enlightened master Yu Yuji. When he heard this, he immediately became unhappy and a trace of anger appeared on his face. 7 days ago, the 2 of them had discussed whether to open the restriction in the hall. At that time, although Qinglin had agreed, now that the formation door was closed, he was blaming him. What was the reason for this? Although they were also in the Yuanying realm, there was a difference of more than 300 years between them. Although Qinglin had long entered the Yuanying realm, due to various reasons, he had not been able to break through to the second stage for a long time. Now that his life was coming to an end, he was a little lethargic. He came here just to see if there was a chance for him to break through. If there was no chance, then he would go back and be reincarnated. There were many restrictions on the mountain path, and the last hall in front of him was the most important place of the Yaoyin clan. It was impossible for it to be heavily guarded. He was afraid that he would trigger some big formation, so he had the intention to retreat. However, under Yu Yuji's request, he had no choice but to agree. He originally planned to turn around and leave once the situation was not right, but now that he saw that there was no way out, he naturally felt that he had been dragged into this. However, Yu Yuji was different. He had only entered the Yuanying realm for more than 10 years. Now was the time when he was full of mettle. He felt that on the road to immortality, he would definitely have his own name. Therefore, he did not approve of Ying Qinglin's way of doing things. He did not know the real intention of the other party, so he could not help but measure the other party by himself. He thought to himself, Ying Qinglin is only doing this because this Qing Tong mountain is very close to the Huanjin temple. He is afraid that after the restriction is removed, the Huanjin temple will gain the most benefits. How can I follow his intention? Therefore, he looked down and said loudly to the hundreds of cultivators, I do not agree with Taoist friend Ying's words. From I's point of view, it is a good thing that the array door is closed. Fellow Taoists, follow I up to the peak. If there is anything that belongs to the Yaoyin clan, I will make the decision to share it with all of you. There is no need to share it with others. Moreover, as long as we find the mechanism of the restriction, we will be able to leave this place. His words struck a chord in the hearts of everyone present. What were they here for? Wasn't it because they wanted to gain some benefits so that they could be of some help on their path of cultivation? They clearly knew that there was a great opportunity in front of them, but they did not care about it. This was definitely not what they wanted. Ying Qinglin sighed and shook his head. He had long lost his sharpness. Since Yu Yuji was so high profile, there was nothing he could do to stop him. In any case, since things had already come to this point, there was no turning back. He might as well shut his mouth and not say anything. At this moment, all the restrictions on the mountain path had been destroyed. After everyone came to an agreement, they ascended the peak together, and it wasn't long before they arrived before the hall. Everyone raised their eyes to take a look, and they couldn't help but praise in their hearts. This main hall stood alone on the dangerous peak and suppressed the mountain. The hall was vast and was supported by 49 gilded pillars. The bottom was made of bluestone, and the outside was a square that could accommodate 1,000 people. A mysterious tablet carried by Baxia stood in front of the hall. It was about 60 meters tall, and the 3 words Bushin Peak were written on it. At the 4 corners of the square were white jade stone blocks, and there were statues of strange beasts crouching on them. Especially on the east and west sides, the water was like a tide. The waterfall at the foot of the mountain actually flowed against the current and went up to the roof of the hall. In the end, it fell into the mouths of a pair of bronze dragon beasts on the ridge of the roof. It was magnificent, exquisite, and extraordinary. Ying Qinglin looked at the mysterious tablet and grunted. He said, there's another restriction here. It looks like it's even more difficult to break than the few places on the mountain path just now. Fellow Taoists, if you want to, then do it yourselves. After saying that, he moved to the side and sat down, not speaking or moving. Yu Yuji couldn't help but feel a little annoyed. Although the restriction was strong, if 2 Taoists Yuanying joined hands, it wouldn't be a problem. But if he was alone, it would be a bit difficult. Ying Qinglin clearly knew that he had to break the restriction to get out, but he refused to do it. It was obvious that he was mocking him and wanted to see him make a fool of himself. Yu Yuji thought to himself, fine, if something good comes out of this hall later, I'd like to see if this Daoren still has the face to reach out and take it. Then he said, on the way here, I heard that Yuan Yang sect's fellow Taoist Mo has also entered this place. May I know which fellow Taoist has seen him? Mo Tianqin had only brought 2 children into the mountain. When other people saw that he was Yuanying Taoist master, they all consciously avoided him, not daring to get close to him. How could anyone know where he was? Yu Yuji wasn't disappointed when no one responded. He was also a person who could make up his mind. He closed his eyes and thought for a while, then said, Junior Marshal Brother, come here. The thin-bearded Taoist walked forward, bowed, and said, what can I do for you, Senior Marshal Brother? Yu Yuji took out a set of formation swords from his sleeve and said, take these formation swords and choose 5 core transformation Taoists to control them. I'll break the formation with a formation later. The thin-bearded Taoist reached out and took the 5 formation swords, then turned around and said to the cultivators, "May I know which fellow Taoist is willing to help break this formation?" Since they had to break the formation door to get out, Kang Tong was the first to step forward. He cupped his hands and bowed to the thin-bearded Taoist, saying, "Taoist Master Hua, Jr. is willing to take a sword." The thin-bearded Taoist was delighted and bowed back, saying, "I'm an outstanding disciple of Shaoqing sect, so I can take a sword." He didn't move at all, but a formation sword immediately flew out and fell towards Kang Tong, who caught it. Fang Zhenlu also stood out from the crowd. He was half a step ahead of Kang Tong. He said in a clear voice, "I can also take a sword." The thin-bearded Taoist nodded happily. "Taoist Master Fang is one of the top 10 disciples of Aotsang sect, so you can also take a sword." As soon as Fang Zhenlu finished speaking, a short Taoist walked out with his hands behind his back and raised his chin, saying, "Give me a sword too." The thin-bearded Taoist nodded, saying, "So it's fellow Taoist Sua Mo from Yuxiao School. With your ability, you can also take a sword." After the 3 swords were divided and the thin-bearded Taoist could take a sword himself, there were 4 people who could take the formation swords. There was only 1 person left. However, among these 100 or so cultivators, there were only a dozen or so core formation cultivators. After Kang Tong, Fang Zhenlu, and Zhua Mo were gone, most of the remaining cultivators were from the Xian sect. However, none of them had any reputation and the difference in their cultivation was too great. For a while, no one was willing to go up. After a long silence, a middle-aged Taoist walked out with a solemn expression and said, "I am Chu Anmin from Wuyan Mountain's Jinyuan Immortal Mansion. I'm willing to give it a try." The thin-bearded Taoist carefully sized him up and said, "So you're from Yuan Yang Sword Sect's outer mansion. Then take a sword." He was also a person with sharp eyes. Although Chu Anmin was also a core formation cultivator, his aura was much weaker than that of Kang Tong and the other 2. However, there were really no suitable candidates at the moment, so he could only give it a try. The thin-bearded Taoist arranged for the 4 people to stand in their respective positions and explained them clearly. Then, he went to his own position and stood still. Yu Yuji walked down and sat in the middle of the formation to control the main formation. Then, Yu Yuji let out a low shout and a yuanying flew out from the top of the formation. He made a hand seal and the 5 formation swords immediately trembled. The 5 people suddenly felt a wave of aura pull their bows. Because they had been warned in advance, they didn't hesitate to use their Danfeng Qi. A 5-colored light flew out from the formation swords and gathered in the middle to form a dazzling sword light. Yu Yuji stretched out his hand and slashed at the Xian steel. As soon as the 2 collided, there was a rumbling sound like thunder. Everyone saw a wave of ripples on the steel. The ripples flowed and flickered endlessly. Just now, the ripples dissipated, but the surface of the steel was still intact. Yu Yuji shouted, "Try again." However, after that, they activated the sword formation again and again. After trying 7 or 8 times, that layer of restriction was still unbreakable. Yu Yuji couldn't help but frown. He had clearly seen the swords just now. If he pointed the bow and combined the 5 swords into a sword formation, it could indeed cut open the restriction. However, there was an aura among the 5 swords that was too sluggish. Just this difference caused the power of the sword formation to be greatly reduced, making it difficult to fully use it. He knew that it was because of Chu Anmin. Compared to the other 4, this person's cultivation was a level lower. If that was the case, even if they tried a few more times, the result would probably be the same. Chu Anmin also knew that it was because of him. With a face full of shame, he stood up and said, "I'm ashamed. My cultivation is not good enough and my strength is not enough. I'm a burden to all of you." Yu Yuji saw that Ing Qinglin was looking at him coldly from the side, as if he was waiting for him to ask for help. He couldn't help but feel annoyed in his heart. However, at this moment, he had no one to use. Just as he was trying to think of a way, an ordinary-looking Taoist walked out from the crowd and smiled at him. He cupped his hands and said, "Taoist you, can you let I try?" Chapter 378. The earth aura that Zhang Yan had on him could only be carried for half a month. Hence, he needed to complete the task that the sect leader had entrusted to him as soon as possible. After that, he could leave the mountain and move to his own immortal's cave. Otherwise, all his efforts would have been in vain. However, if he were to waste time here, that was not what he wanted. Now that everyone was blocked in front of the main hall's restriction formation, he volunteered himself. Yu Yuji sat motionlessly in the formation. As a spiritual master Yuanying, he could naturally see that Zhang Yan's aura was not weak. However, Chu Anmin had also volunteered, so he could not help but feel doubtful. Thus, he asked, "Fellow Taoist, which sect are you from?" Zhang Yan cupped his hands and said, "I am Zuanyanzi, an itinerant cultivator from the East Sea." An itinerant cultivator? Yu Yuji frowned slightly and hesitated. Activating the power of the sword formation was definitely not as easy as it seemed. The person holding the sword had to go through hundreds of changes before he could release the sword chi. The sharpness of the sword could not be too strong, nor could it be too weak. This was the only way to harmonize the spiritual vigor and resonate with the others. In other words, among the 5 people holding the sword, if only one of them used too much magic power, or if his magic power was too weak to match the power of the other 4, the power of the formation would not be able to reach a perfect state. Chu Anmin was an outer sect disciple of the Yuanyang sect, so he could be considered a disciple of the Yuanyang sect. He had also condensed his magic power and true seal. In terms of cultivation base, he might be on par with Kang Tong, Fang Zhenlu, Zhua Mo, and the thin-bearded cultivator. However, when it came to subtle changes, he immediately showed his true colors. Perhaps Fang Zhenlu had seen Zhang Yan easily break the restriction formation of the pagoda. He pondered for a moment and said, "Taoist Yu, this fellow Taoist has a profound cultivation base. He should be able to help us." Yu Yuji indeed did not have a suitable candidate at the moment. Since Fang Zhenlu said so, he went with the flow and said, "All right, this fellow Taoist Zuanyanzi can come and try." Chu Anmin's face was flushed red as he retreated. One of his fellow disciples came up to him. He said angrily, "Senior martial brother, this person is just a rogue cultivator. How can he be better than you? I'm afraid Priest Yu has misjudged me this time." The corner of Chu Anmin's mouth twitched as he stared fixedly at Zhang Yan. He had suffered a setback, so he naturally hoped that Zhang Yan wouldn't succeed. It would be best if Zhang Yan didn't fare as well as he did. That way, he would be able to salvage some face. However, they were destined to be disappointed. Zhang Yan walked steadily to his position. He picked up the array sword. His calm and composed appearance made the people around him not dare to underestimate him. Yu Yuji's spirit was slightly shaken. He nodded his head and performed a hand seal, triggering a change. The 5 formation swords each emitted a buzzing sound. Zhang Yan smiled. Following the guidance of the mysterious art core evil chi, it instantly passed through the hundreds of variations and shot out a colorful sword splendor. The effect of his attack was extraordinary. Yu Yuji saw that the heavenly sword chi was pure and clean when it flew out. She immediately looked at him in awe, but she didn't think too much about it. She wanted to secretly mediate to prevent another failure, but when she gathered the 5 energies, she was pleasantly surprised. However, this sword light was in perfect harmony with the other 4 sword lights. He was immediately overjoyed, but at the same time, he realized that if Xian Yuanzi was really an independent cultivator, how could he have done this without an inheritance? This person's identity should be fake. However, as a cultivator, everyone had their own secrets. Since they were unwilling to reveal it in front of everyone, they would not dare to do so. He wouldn't be so bored as to investigate further. Although he thought so, his hands did not stop. He raised the ball of light and pointed it forward. After the 5 array swords merged into one, its power increased greatly. This sword light shot out with an imposing manner. It was like the sun had just risen above the mountain peak. Golden light scattered everywhere, turning into thousands of strands and countless fragments of light that bombarded the Xian's steel. Even though the restriction was tough, it was only set up to protect the temple from being eroded by the rain and wind. After all, it was not a defensive formation like the Great Mountain Protecting Formation. When it was attacked by a sword formation, it could not withstand it and suddenly collapsed. The Jishu Xian steel suffered a disaster. After a series of explosions, a few cracks appeared and a few small pieces of gravel were scattered on the ground. Once this thing was destroyed, the restriction completely disappeared. The two stone doors in front of the main hall rumbled and the latch behind them fell. Yu Yuji was overjoyed. He stood up abruptly. He didn't even want the formation sword anymore and threw it to the ground. He first looked at the majestic hall that was now unobstructed, then looked at Ing Qinglin who was sitting there without making a sound. He snorted lightly and waved his sleeve. A gust of wind wrapped around his body. He knocked open the stone door and flew into the hall. As soon as he entered the hall, more than 100 cultivators in the square were unwilling to be left behind, and they all swarmed in. Zhang Yan was not in a hurry, and he followed behind them with clear smoke circling around his body as he slowly walked in. Yu Yuji walked at the very front. His speed wasn't slow. He led everyone through 3 halls in a row and saw a 5 zhang wide, 3 zhang high water pattern wall. After going around it, a vast and serene hall appeared. Multicolored arches, silk beams hung from the walls, 6 exquisite jade bridges in front of the hall, the flowing water below surged endlessly. Pearls were embedded in the walls of the hall, sprinkling down a clear radiance like the cold moon. Yu Yuji floated in the air. In front of him was a high platform. Behind the jade wall, there was a circular painting wall. On it was a stone carving of a flood dragon coiled around its neck, with a fierce beard and angry eyes, baring its fangs and brandishing its claws, the patterns of waves around its body, as if it was stirring up a storm. Yu Yuji stared at the painting without blinking and said in a deep voice, "This is the real important place of the Yaoyin clan." Ing Qinglin's slightly old voice came from behind him, "Fellow Taoist Yu, let's find the core of the protective formation first before we talk about this." Yu Yuji didn't even turn his head. He smiled faintly and said, "Since we've already entered this place, are you afraid that we won't be able to find the core?" Fellow Taoist Ing is really too impatient. After sweeping his gaze around, he turned to the side and said to the thin-bearded cultivator, "Junior brother Hua, I'll have to trouble you to go to the side hall and investigate this place." The Yuxiao School's Suemo rolled his eyes and took the initiative to say, "This hall is very big, I am willing to follow Taoist Hua." Yu Yuji knew what he was talking about, but he didn't mind. He said, "Then I'll have to trouble fellow Taoists Hua." There were 2 side halls beside the main hall, and the restrictions on them were not small. The cultivators present didn't know if there were any hidden restrictions here, so they didn't dare to walk around casually. They all stayed in the main hall. After a while, the thin-bearded Taoist and Zua Mo returned to the main hall and said, "Senior brother, I've already gone to take a look. The 2 side halls also have this kind of painting, but it has long been broken and is empty inside, only revealing a bottomless cave. From the looks of it, it seems that something was originally sealed inside." Yu Yuji was slightly surprised. Something that was sealed by the Yaoyin sect in such a solemn manner was certainly not something easy to deal with. A bad feeling arose in his heart, but he quickly suppressed it. He said in a loud voice, "If that's the case, then the location of the pivot is most likely behind this wall. If we can enter it, then this sect will no longer have any secrets to hide from us." As soon as he finished speaking, he waved his sleeve and shot out a bolt of green lightning. There was a loud bang, and the painting collapsed. It was actually easily broken. Before anyone could react, he had already stepped inside. When he reached the inner room, he raised his head and saw that there was a big well in front of him. The well railing was 3 feet high, and there was a blood-red seal talisman on it. On top of the well lid, there was a bamboo scroll, a stone box, a jade plate, a golden seal, and a set of robes. However, all of them were shrouded in a layer of faint golden light. His eyes couldn't help but reveal a look of excitement. The hundreds of disciples behind him also squeezed in together. When they saw these 5 items, their eyes also burned with passion. Even if they had never seen them before, they knew that these were the keepsakes of the sect's inheritance. Divine abilities, Taoist books, secret techniques, and even Dharma treasures, pills, and spirit liquids might all be inside. It should be known that Patriarch Tai Hung was a mighty cultivator who had ascended through cultivation. How could his teachings be simple? Even though this place was only passed down by his eldest disciple, Yi Jiuyang, when the Yaoyin clan was in the Donghua continent, its power was comparable to the great Xianmen sects like Nanhua, Yuanyang, and Taihao. Anyone who obtained some of it would receive great benefits. If it fell into the hands of one of these sects, it was needless to say that in 100 years, it would be on par with the Shaoqing, Qinsang, and Yuxiao sections. Yu Yuji circled around the high well twice. He seemed to be thinking about how to break the seal, but he was actually thinking in his heart, how can we leave this kind of opportunity to others? There are more than 100 people here, and there are many disciples from the 10 great sections. If we split it up, what will be left of Mayonata Temple? Just as he was thinking, Daoren and Ing Qinglin also stepped in. They took a look, and their faces suddenly tensed up. They said in a deep voice, "Fellow Taoists, it's best that you don't touch the items here." When Yu Yuji heard this, he suddenly turned around and said in a displeased tone, "Fellow Taoist, what do you mean?" However, Ing Qinglin ignored him and said to the people present, "It is said that Yi Jiuyang was ordered by Patriarch Taiheng to create the Yaoyin clan to guard an item. If this place was set up to seal some evil demon, then it must be something extraordinary to be able to suppress it with a keepsake. Fellow Taoists, you must be careful and not open it." When Yu Yuji heard this, he sneered and retorted, "Fellow Taoist, you are wrong. Now that we are trapped in the formation, we can only open the seal and obtain the teachings to leave this place. Could it be that we don't dare to move just because we are worried about fellow Taoists' presumption?" What a joke! Ing Qinglin's frosty white eyebrows knitted together tightly. He said, "Fellow Taoist, with us here, the sect will definitely not abandon us. How many capable people are there in the 10 great sects? We will definitely find a way to break the formation. We just need to wait for a few more days." What he said was reasonable. Since there was a strange phenomenon happening in Qingtong Mountain, even if the cultivators outside the mountain did not come for them, they would not let go of the treasure. Sooner or later, they would find a way to enter the mountain, and then they would be able to leave the mountain safely. Who would have thought that at this moment, Yu Yuji seemed to have heard something funny and started laughing out loud. He shook his head repeatedly and said, "There are 100 people here today, but once the formation door opens, there will be 1,000 people, 10,000 people." He pointed at the manhole cover, and his eyes widened as he shouted, "Then let me ask you, how many of these 5 treasures are enough to split?" Chapter 379. Yu Yuji's words could be said to have grasped everyone's heartstrings. They all thought to themselves, "We've gone through so much trouble to come here, how can we be scared off by a few empty words?" Moreover, if the treasures here were divided among a few more people, how much would fall into our hands? Kang Tong, Fang Zhenlu, and the others had originally come under the orders of their sects to investigate the situation. How could they leave so easily before the results were clear? Ing Qinglin's words could not move them at all, and their expressions did not change in the slightest. Of course, there was no lack of people in this group who wanted to play it safe and wanted to retreat for fear that there was indeed a demon among them. However, they were in the minority and could not change the situation. When Ing Qinglin saw that there were still people looking at him suspiciously, he could not help but feel annoyed and sternly said, "Fellow Taoist, please be careful. Daoren has lived for close to 1,000 years and has experienced countless hardships. Why would he speak carelessly? If you want to forcefully open this seal, harming yourself is a small matter, but don't drag our fellow Taoists down with you." Zhang Yan's eyes flickered slightly. In his plan, this seal formation had to be opened, so he could not let Daoren ruin it. Thus, he smiled and stepped forward. He first cupped his hands, then said, I's words do not carry much weight, but there is something that must be said. The Yaoyin clan has been established for close to 10,000 years. No matter what kind of demon has been suppressed, it has long been unable to recover. Even if it still has some demonic might, there are 2 enlightened masters and over 100 fellow Taoists here. Do you think we can't deal with it? As soon as these words were said, everyone immediately responded. Kong Tong was the first to speak. Fellow Taoist Xian Yuanzi's words are reasonable. Even if there is a demon, we have nothing to fear. Even if it can leave this place, we can still kill it. Well said. Exactly. If this evil spirit is able to survive for 10,000 years, then what kind of demonic being is it? How could it possibly be trapped here? Even if it is still here, after 10,000 years, it is probably on its last breath. How can it be a match for Taoist you and our fellow Taoists? All of a sudden, everyone spoke up in succession, and the worries they had at the beginning were completely swept away. All of them felt that Ng Qinglin was being too careful with his words. Even Taoist Grotto Heaven only had a lifespan of 3,000 years. Even if he was a great demon or a great demon, if he was suppressed for nearly 10,000 years without the nourishment of spiritual energy, he would be lucky to survive. They really didn't believe that he could defeat everyone present. Old ancestor Tai Heng's eldest disciple, Yi Jiuyang, was only in the elephant realm when the sect was founded. Later on, there was no news of him ascending like his master. Most likely, he had also reincarnated and died. If there really was a supreme evil spirit inside, how could there be no one watching over it? Not even a word was left behind. Isn't he afraid that this devil will find the reincarnation of the Yaoyin clan's disciple after he escapes? Hence, it was reasonable to assume that there might have been monsters in this world, but they had long since perished. Seeing that Zhang Yan's words had made everyone's attitude firm, Ng Qinglin couldn't help but glare at him angrily. If it was an ordinary cultivator. After being glared at by Taoist Yuanying, they would have been scared out of their wits, but Zhang Yan acted as if nothing had happened. Yu Yuji couldn't help but be overjoyed. He first cast a praising look at Zhang Yan, then said to Ng Qinglin without any trace of politeness, "It's hard to go against the will of the masses. Fellow Taoist Ng, you can keep your voice down." He came here on the orders of the temple, so he was prepared in advance. He also brought a magic treasure with him, so he could subdue any evil spirit in this ceiling formation. Moreover, he even hoped that there was really such a thing. That way, he only needed to relax a little, and he could borrow the hands of this evil spirit to kill these juniors. In the future, when he got out of this place, this debt wouldn't be on his head. This was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to strengthen the Inata temple. He couldn't avoid it at all. If he used some underhanded methods, then so be it. There was no need to be concerned about the small details. If he could bring the inheritance of the Yaoyin clan back to the temple, there would definitely be a place for him among the Taoist abode masters. After all, Ng Qinglin was a senior. Being mocked by Yu Yuji like this, he felt a little embarrassed. He let out a long sigh and said, "Fine, fine, fine. I'm already old, maybe I guessed wrong. Fellow Taoist you're on your own. Don't play with fire." He shook his head, flicked his sleeves, and walked out. Yu Yuji sent him off with an indifferent look, then he looked around and said, "Fellow Taoist Ying's lifespan is coming to an end. He's already old and is only waiting to be reincarnated. It's normal for him to have some misgivings. Fellow Taoists, please don't take it to heart." No one responded. With Yu Yuji's influence, they might be able to agree with him a few times. However, if they were muddle-headed and didn't know the gravity of the situation, then they would really have a death wish for a Taoist master who wasn't far away from them. Yu Yuji saw that Daoren, who was a hindrance, had already left, and he was satisfied. He turned around and looked at the restrictive array. Everyone's attention was involuntarily drawn to it. He stood still for a moment, then suddenly raised his hand. With a rumble, he shot out a bolt of green lightning. However, after the light dissipated, he saw that the layer of golden light didn't move at all. Yu Yuji's expression was solemn. Even his earth-shocking lightning didn't move. This restrictive array was probably personally sealed by a powerful cultivator. However, this was also within his expectations. He lowered his head and thought for a moment. Then he turned around and said in a deep voice, "Everyone, this restrictive array is very powerful. I need to use a secret technique to break it. While I'm cultivating, I can't allow any disturbances. I hope that everyone can leave this place for now." Many of the cultivators here were startled at first, but after a few words of private discussion, they all left with relief and went to wait outside. As for whether Yu Yuji would refine the restrictive array and take everything for himself, then use the formation to escape, they weren't worried at all. There were disciples from Qinsung, Shaoqing, Yuanyang, Yuxiao, and other sects here. They all wanted a share of the loot. Although they were all here alone, they had the entire sect behind them. How could the Inata temple dare to offend so many fellow Taoists at once? Zhang Yan took a deep look at Yu Yuji, then looked at the 5 treasures of the sect, especially the talisman. A faint smile appeared on his face, then he turned around and left. After a while, only Yu Yuji and the thin-bearded cultivator were left. Yu Yuji looked at the ceiling formation and seemed to have made a decision. He said in a deep voice, "Junior brother, give me the clear yang fire." The thin-bearded cultivator responded and took out a jade box from his sleeve. However, when he handed it over to Yu Yuji, he hesitated for a moment and couldn't help but remind, "Senior brother, this fire is very powerful, and it was refined by Grandmaster with all of his power. Master used a lot of our sect's power back then, and the rest is here. Every bit we use is a bit less. Just to break this ceiling formation, isn't it too much? Why don't we do it just now and call a few fellow Taoists to help us?" Yu Yuji stretched out his hand and grabbed his wrist. He stared at the latter and said in a serious tone, "Junior brother, this ceiling formation is not a small matter. I'm afraid it was created by Yi Jiuyang back then. With our cultivation, we will never be able to break it. If we work together, I'm afraid we will destroy the item inside. We can only use this fire to slowly melt it. If we get the item inside, I will have the chance to enter the Grotto Heaven realm in the future, so it's worth it to give up this fire." The thin-bearded cultivator's heart skipped a beat. He said in a surprised tone, "Senior brother, you're going to..." Yu Yuji slowly let go of his hand and said with an unfathomable smile, "We haven't reached that point yet, but if we can take these 5 treasures first, we will be able to advance or retreat. I'm sure that there will be changes in the next few days. When that time comes, it will depend on the methods of each sect." The thin-bearded cultivator nodded silently and slowly handed the jade box to him. Yu Yuji took it and said, "Once I use this fire, it won't be easy for me to stop. Junior brother, stay here and protect me." The thin-bearded cultivator solemnly nodded. This was another temple, and it wasn't the wilderness, so they couldn't borrow the earth vein chi. Even if they used the formation flags, it would be useless. They could only rely on him to protect the temple. But after thinking for a moment, he frowned and said, "It's fine for him, but there's still no trace of Mo Tianxin. If he comes later and insists on barging in, how are we going to stop him?" Yu Yuji glanced outside and narrowed his eyes. "If he comes, you don't need to stop him. Until the last moment, no one knows what the outcome will be. Also, he won't be the only one coming." He refined the ceiling formation inside, and the 100 or so cultivators outside scattered to find a place to meditate. After Ng Qinglin left the main hall, he felt depressed. After sighing a few times, he went to the roof and sat down. However, he didn't dare to relax. His ears were constantly listening to the movements inside the hall. Several hours passed like this. When the sky gradually darkened, he suddenly raised his head and looked towards the mountain path. His eyes narrowed as he saw 2 people swaggering towards him from the opposite direction. With his hands behind his back, Zhang Boyan walked into the square as if there was no one else around. Behind him, Su Gongyuan followed closely behind. When he moved, wisps of yellow smoke were emitted from his body. Simultaneously, the smoke was steaming hot, like poisonous smoke from a cave, like a fiery mouth filled with baleful aura. Before they even arrived in front of the hall, the Xian Light Realm cultivators sitting on the square fell to the ground when they saw the smoke. Zhang Boyan's eyes flickered with green flames as he laughed heartily. He waved his sleeves and a plume of black smoke came out. In an instant, it wrapped around the disciples. He rubbed his hands together, and in the blink of an eye, they turned into a mass of blood essence that entered his body. Ying Qinglin slowly stood up from the roof and said angrily, "Zhang Boyan, you demon, why are you here?" Zhang Boyan chuckled. With his hands clasped behind his back, he puffed out his chest and said in a calm and unruffled manner, "Come to think of it, it's quite a coincidence. I heard about what happened at Mount Qingtong and wanted to come here to try my luck. But halfway through, I saw you, an old Taoist, also coming here, so I had to come." Ying Qinglin's face was as cold as water. He shouted, "You really think highly of me, Daoren. However, fellow Yu is here. Aren't you being too arrogant by coming here alone?" Zhang Boyan smiled strangely and said, "Yu Yuji is probably refining the ceiling formation inside. Even if he knows you fought with me, he won't have time to care about you, right? It's time to settle the old scores between us." Ying Qinglin was shocked. His expression darkened and he said, "Is there a clone of you here, or is there a disciple of your demonic sect?" Zhang Boyan let out a sinister laugh and said, "So what if there is and so what if there isn't? I don't mind telling you, I came here today to steal the demonic sect of the Tai Heng ancestor. I don't care if you are a warrior of the Xian Gate or a disciple of the demonic sect. I will kill you all." Chapter 380. Zhang Boyan's extremely arrogant words immediately alarmed everyone in the hall. Just now they knew that a devil had arrived outside the hall. While they were panicking, they heard Ying Qinglin's voice from outside, "Fellow Taoists, there's no need to panic. Daoren is here. He will definitely ensure your safety." Although these words were slightly reassuring, all the cultivators here knew that this devil cultivator must have something to rely on if he dared to bully them so openly. It was fine if Ying Qinglin could restrain him, but if he couldn't, would anyone really care about their lives? They had to find a way to protect themselves. Immediately, someone remembered that there was still a Yuanying master here, so they hurried to the back of the hall, wanting to ask him to come out and help. However, when they reached the broken wall, they were stopped by the thin-bearded cultivator. He frowned and bowed apologetically, "My senior brother is using a secret technique to refine the ceiling formation. If he is disturbed, there will be a backlash. I hope that everyone will not go any further." Zhang Yan was not far from here. When he heard these words, his heart turned cold and he thought to himself, Yu Yuji is obviously making excuses. Even if he wants to refine the ceiling formation, he would not put himself in such an awkward situation where he cannot extricate himself. Otherwise, if he encountered a great enemy, wouldn't he be easily taken down? He is just unwilling to join hands with Ying Qinglin to deal with that old devil outside. However, to him, this did not affect his grand plan. Thus, he only watched coldly from the side and did not say anything. When Zhang Boyan saw that Ying Qinglin was still trying to protect the disciples in the hall, he couldn't help but laugh wildly and said, "You Daoren, you should just mind your own business." He swayed his body. Turbid smoke and sparks sprayed from the top of his head. In the thick clouds, a large black hand reached out and clawed at the top of the cloud. Then, a black Yuanying leaped out. As soon as this devil appeared, a miserable wind howled and demonic fog rolled. The square turned dark. Sand and pebbles flew everywhere. Ying Qinglin originally thought that Yu Yuji would come out to help when he heard the commotion, but after waiting for a long time, Yu Yuji still didn't come out. Ying Qinglin couldn't help but sigh and shake his head. However, at this critical juncture, there was no time for him to think too much, and he discarded these distracting thoughts. He raised his head and didn't cower in the slightest in the face of the raging Yin wind. His white beard fluttered in the wind as he let out a low shout. Like a thunderclap, a Yuanying with a flickering green light leaped out from the top of his head. Riding a wisp of green smoke, he rose into the air. For a moment, it was dazzling, illuminating the hall and dispersing the devilish aura below. Within the mist of light, one of Yuanying's feet was on a white crane, the other on a flying rock, and his body was coiled around a mysterious python. He was about 3 zhang tall, and his body was in midair. His appearance was exactly the same as Ying Qinglin. His eyes radiated power, and there was not a hint of aging in them. He shouted loudly, his voice rumbling, "Zhang Boyan, today, this humble Taoist will subdue demons here." Zhang Boyan stared at the Yuanying with greed in his eyes. Following that, a cunning light flashed in his eyes as he made another hand seal. Another Yuanying that looked exactly like him walked out. With a chuckle, he turned into a streak of black smoke and circled around, heading straight for the hall behind him. Ying Qinglin said in shock, "Yuanying avatar. Not good." He immediately realized that the other party was going to slaughter the disciples of the celestial sect of wonders in the hall. His personality could be considered mellow, and just now, he had already said those words. How could he sit back and do nothing? With a shake of his sleeve, a beast-subduing collar flew out and spun in the air. With a flash of light, an eagle with soft feathers and a fiery red color flew out. Ying Qinglin warned, "Fellow Taoist, take my magic weapon with you. Please take care of the disciples in the hall. After I subdue this demon, I'll come back to help." The eagle looked back and spoke in human language. It said in a soft and delicate voice of a young girl, "Master, don't worry. I will do my best." With a flap of its wings, it also flew into the hall. Su Gongyuan saw that Hong Ying's cultivation level was only at the core transformation stage. He thought it would be too dangerous for him to stay at Zhang Boyan's place, so he said, "Zhang Zhenren, I'll go and stop her." Without waiting for a reply, he shouted and went inside. Zhang Boyan was facing off against an old enemy, so he didn't have the mood to care about him. He grabbed out a banner that was filled with yin qi and stuck it into the ground. It easily pierced through the stone. With another spell, the scenery around him changed. A dark haze covered the peak of the mountain. The sky was dark, and the moon and sun couldn't be seen. Countless withered demon hands reached out from the dark clouds and tried to grab Ying Qinglin. Without waiting for Ying Qinglin's order, the python on his body protected him and sent out waves of gang qi to destroy the demon hands. He glanced at the banner and his expression changed. He immediately recognized the origin of this object. This dark cloud was formed by the gathering of human desire and demon energy. It could isolate the spiritual energy of heaven and earth. If he didn't care about it, not only would it unknowingly corrupt his mind, it would also make the demon's spirit weak and powerless. Then, he would definitely be at a disadvantage in the following battle. He definitely wouldn't allow this to happen, so he gathered all the mana in his body and pointed with his hand. A bolt of lightning suddenly shot out, and with a kacha sound, it tore a crack in the pitch-black sky. A ray of sunlight once again penetrated through and landed on Qin Dun's head. Zhang Boyan also didn't expect the opponent to be so decisive and be willing to use so much of his yuan qi to tear the dark cloud apart. However, it wasn't easy for him to borrow this treasure to deal with this person, so how could he be willing to let it be broken so easily? He muttered some incantations and the dark cloud twisted and struggled as if it wanted to close up. How could Ying Qinglin let him do that? The white crane beside him rushed forward and pecked at Zhang Boyan's Yuanying head. Then, the fish dragon under his feet leaped up and its body trembled. It turned into a cloud that was constantly changing and entered the crack. It actually stopped the cloud from closing up. On the other side, the red eagle arrived in the hall. It folded its wings and turned into a beautiful woman wearing a red silk dress and a red crown on her head. Her skin was as white as snow. She looked around and was about to chase after the incarnation of Yuanying. However, she suddenly felt something strange behind her. Her beautiful eyes turned cold and she turned around. With a shout, she released a scarlet evil chi to block the yellow smoke behind her. She saw countless demon shadows dancing in the smoke. As if they had smelled the blood of a living person, they all rushed towards her. She first took a few steps back to avoid the attack. Then, she wiped her hand and took out a red handkerchief. She muttered something and swung her hand. The handkerchief transformed and grew with the wind. In a flash, it wrapped all the demon shadows in it. With a shake of the air, they all turned into essence chi and dissipated. Su Gongyuan chased after her. Originally, he wanted to catch this woman off guard. However, he didn't expect that the other party actually had a magical artifact on her. It wasn't as simple as Ying Qinglin's demon spirit. He didn't dare to be careless. He took out the jade mirror that Zhang Boyan gave him and waved it at the woman. A dazzling light rushed out from the mirror and pierced through the air. The eagle girl felt that the world was filled with white and she couldn't open her eyes. Not only that, she felt dizzy and couldn't stand steadily. However, when the light hit her body, a beautiful feather flew out and emitted layers of light. It blocked in front of her. Although it lasted for a moment, it turned into fire and flew away. However, it also blocked the mirror light from reaching her body. She was shocked. She didn't expect that the other party also had a magical artifact. She quickly focused and waited. She wanted to deal with the enemy first and then go after the incarnation of Yuanying. With her delay, Zhang Boyan's incarnation of Yuanying had already gone inside. This incarnation actually hadn't been refined to the state of perfect harmony. There wasn't much use in fighting with cultivators of the same realm. If he was injured, it would hurt his own cultivation instead. However, it was more than enough to deal with low-level disciples. He relied on his magic power. He recklessly barged into the hall. Before he could stabilize himself, he saw a cold sword light slashing towards his head. This light pierced out from the inner hall and traversed thousands of feet. It slashed to the front of the hall, showing that there was nothing it couldn't cut. The aura of breaking all techniques came. The incarnation of Yuanying was slightly vigilant. He raised his hand and a yellow cloud appeared. It was thick and turbid, obscure and dim. It went against the sword light. After a series of sizzling sounds, the sword light slashed 5 feet into the cloud. In the end, it was blocked. However, it almost slashed the cloud into 2. He wasn't surprised and said, "Shaoqing killing sword." As the sword light disappeared, the second sword light slashed towards him. The incarnation of Yuanying sneered, "If you, Ji Jingzi, were here, it would be fine. However, you alone aren't enough." He was about to use his magic power to retaliate when his expression suddenly changed. He went into a defensive stance. He saw silver missiles the size of goose eggs flying towards him and colliding with his protective cloud. Every time one of them hit him, he would take a step back. More than 10 missiles flew towards him and he couldn't help but take a few steps back. He was almost out of the hall. Fang Zhenlu put down the small and beautiful golden bow in his hand. He looked slightly tired. His moon-gathering bow was a profound weapon given by Lady Chen. Usually, one shot was enough to kill a core formation cultivator. However, against this incarnation of Yuanying, it could only force him to take a few steps back. Being pressured like this by a junior, Zhang Boyan's nascent soul stage seemed to have already been enraged, and he formed a seal to disperse his body. Rumble. Amidst the dispersal of smoke and clouds, over 100 hideous and terrifying devils flew out, and they howled miserably like the tide as they scurried about chaotically within the hall. They specifically targeted the disciples with low magic power, and those who couldn't dodge in time were swallowed in a single gulp. Kang Tong saw the demons coming, but he wasn't afraid at all. He drove his flying sword into the air and slashed at one of the demons. In an instant, it was split into 2 halves. However, after the sword light passed, the 2 halves merged again. The demon shook its head and flew up again to attack again. Chu Anmin was leading his fellow disciples to resist when he suddenly felt his body become light, and when he turned around to look, he noticed to his astonishment that he was being held up by a devil. However, the treasured clothes he wore were tough and couldn't be torn apart in a short period of time. He was just about to struggle down when a dozen more ghost heads came over and surrounded him and bit him. In just an instant, they'd torn apart the treasured clothes he wore, and then they bit his limbs and torso before tearing him apart on the spot, and then they started chewing his body with their warm blood. Zhou Mo of Yuxiao School was besieged by 7 or 8 demons. He was also flustered and didn't have that proud and calm look on his face. Sweat appeared on his forehead. He took out a flying shuttle with silver stars flashing on it and used it to protect his body. He was bitterly holding on and didn't dare to move recklessly. These demons were originally only the size of a wicker basket, but after swallowing more than 10 people, they grew to the size of 10 feet. Their sharp howls shook the tiles and dust, and they became more and more arrogant. The demons searched for blood and food. Among them, 3 went straight for Zhang Yan. He activated his magic power and the evil aura from his den surged out, pushing them away. As his eyes turned, he saw that the demons didn't care about what was in front of them. They just opened their mouths and bit randomly, as if they only knew how to devour blood and qi. They didn't seem to have any intelligence at all. He couldn't help but have an idea. With a low shout, he soared into the air and flew towards the side hall. The 3 demons didn't give up and chased after him while roaring. Fang Zhenlu had a lot of protective magic treasures on him, so he still had time to pay attention to other places. When he saw Zhang Yan was about to leave, he immediately wanted to warn him. However, when the words were about to come out of his mouth, he saw that Zhang Yan had already flown away. He didn't have time to warn him, so he couldn't help but shake his head, thinking that Zhang Yan was doomed. You're tuning in to the Blissful Bookshelf YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.